Well, that didn't work.
That's okay. We'll run with it. This is, live TV. It's like working with kids and animals. You pay your dues, you take your chances, and off we go. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Privy Council, episode 18, I think it is. And this episode is really sort of geared for us to maximize viewer interactions. This show, we're going to do a little bit of over the horizon, which by now I think you understand is us talking about some things indicatively to try to get your attention focused on things that we'll probably pick up in more detail as they develop a bit further. And we're going to do that this evening with three particular topics. The first one is we're gonna take a little bit of a dive into Russia's new foreign policy concept that was published earlier this month and sort of lays out their case for why the United States is enemy number one in their world and the threat that they see to what they call the Ruski Mir, or the Russian world, and a clash of civilizations. So they've borrowed all the language that we've lived through in the context of social structures and social constructs and social clashes, and have turned that around and made it the basis for foreign policy. But it's not something that I think that we can ignore out of hand, because I think we'll see that they're acting on it. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what's probably something of a sleeper subject for most folks, and that is the importance and the potential consequences of both presidential and parliamentary elections in Turkey on May the 14th. And the implications there, depending on which way that goes, are stark and varied, and has a real potential ability to change the direction of a number of regional conflicts in the area. We'll talk a little bit about who's on first and what's on second. We'll do a little bit of a discussion around the state of global debt markets and why we should care about that. And then we'll open up the viewer participation line through Gilded. And let me, for those of you who don't know about this, let me ask Watcher to pull up that slide that we prepared and circulated. And Watcher, I'll let you talk them through how this works. I mean, I understand it, but you're the execution side of this, so let's listen to you.
Certainly. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and drop a new invite link into both chats. All you have to do is join our regular Gilded channel. You're going to then navigate to the Privy Council waiting room channel and indicate that you would like to get on the show by typing here or me or next or whatever. Just put something in there to let me know you want in. I will DM you and then give you a voice call when I have a free moment in order to clarify what you want to call about and to see about your broadcasting equipment and make sure that it's up to snuff. And then provided everything checks out, we'll slot you in when it's time.
So I'd like to encourage folks to do this because I think it works well. It's a lot of fun for us, and I think it gives you the opportunity to steer sort of the direction of the show to topics that you want to talk about. So it's not too soon to start queuing up, I think, from that perspective. So with that, let me turn to members of the council and let Mr. Dolio tell us what he's worried about these days. He shared some of that with us offline. I don't know if you want to go through that, but what's been going on since I've seen you last?
Well, actually had a pretty solid Bible study group just before this. Guys who are fans of the council, guys who are fans on Twitter, followers of us all, and one guy who's actually been to an NC Scout class with me. So pretty cool stuff. I'm sure they're all probably watching now. I'll tell you what I'm worried about. I'm worried mostly about domestic conflict. And last Friday, I predicted that Akron was going to have some issues this week. Then on Monday night, they announced that they're not indicting the officers, and apparently there are some things going on in Akron this evening. So I really just see that all ramping up. I also think that in Kansas City, they're going to kill this old man. Whether he has a heart attack because his house is surrounded and having things thrown at it 24 hours a day, or they're going to literally kill him. I think that civil conflict is really just under the surface in America. And being involved with a lot of different speakers in a lot of different places, it's a tense time right now. So watch for civil conflict.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you have to ask the question sort of sui bono, and I think we know the answer to that in most instances. So
Well, we might not know specifically who, but I bet they speak Chinese or Russian.
that's certainly part of it. That's certainly part of it. And James, commander of the sheeple, how are you, sir?
Well, you brought up sui bono, so yes, pigs are good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping for civility where Joe sees conflict, but he's you handle that professionally, Joe. I kind of look at the other side, which is how do you maintain integrity in societies, and it's hard because they accelerate and they tend to spin out of control, and I've seen that in a lot of places. I never thought I'd be looking at it in my own country. So yeah, it's an issue here, and you hope for civility on the part of people who can assert some semblance of control and kinship and neighborliness and all of those good attributes, but it gets hard. So as the economy begins to tighten and we get under more pressure, it gets even more difficult. So be thoughtful, be kind, but take care of your own and take care of your towns. Become good friends to your neighbors, your sheriff, and make sure if you take a chance, make sure your police officers know who you are and recognize you as a neighbor. That's kind of the way to do it.
Well, that's uplifting.
Yeah, it's my nature.
Yeah.
I suppose it depends on the neighborhood you live in. My
That's
police
true.
officers
I'm
all
not-
speak Arabic, so
Yeah, I'm not in a tough part of a city like Akron, I have to say.
Yeah,
It's-
I don't know, starting with Ferguson and going forward, the opportunity once these things kick off for enlightened engagement as a way to sort of talk them down seems to evaporate pretty quickly. So
hence definitely engage in it now while you have the luxury. That's the logic. Make sure
yeah,
people
but
know who you are.
I think that, and I'll look to Joe to sort of keep me honest on this or tell me I'm full of feathers. But I mean, the nature of these
Yes.
things, the nature of these things though have become scripted since Ferguson, and even more tightly controlled because much of the rabble rousing that occurs has been imported for the event. And so I don't know how you engage with BLM or Antifa folks who've come in from 200 miles or 300 miles away with the sole purpose of creating the havoc that you seek to avoid. So
yeah.
I don't know that there's an appeal to civic unity that is going to resonate with those folks. It sort of just eggs them on even further, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think that right now in the current environment of these mass shootings committed by people of the alphabet mafia, you really have to take it more seriously than we may have. So many people are quick to say, "Yeah, but look at them; they're leftist losers. They're this, they're that." They're getting out and training every single weekend. They're doing stop to bleed courses. They're doing firearms courses. One side's gearing up for war. The other side's laughing at them. Guess which side's going to be ahead?
Yeah, yeah. It's a tough reality, but it's something that we're going to have to figure out. And this goes, if you watched CFC earlier today, we talked a little bit about sort of the historical threads of this day and how they're interlinked and interwoven, and projected them forward to a date in 2 years from now when I think that things are really going to come unglued. It's hard to find it's hard to find the New Testament answer to this stuff, and I keep going back to the Old Testament and looking for answers in that regard. So
I completely agree with you. There's not a New Testament answer to this other than Galatians 5:1. It is for freedom's sake that you have been set free. Stand firm. Do not let
Yeah.
yourselves be yoked again by slavery. So
yeah, so I think that's sort of the current zeitgeist these days, and they've been busy, and I'll say this, and people can take issue with it, but the left has been busy breeding orcs. And the orcs are out there these days, guys, and you're not gonna talk them down, I don't think, with too much. That may all work in the faculty lounge, but I'm not sure that it works in the context of real street action to too great a degree.
Hey, that was a good move. By using the word orcs, you're going to get all the Ukrainian stands to pop over here and watch this video. He said orcs. He must be talking about Russians. So well done.
Yeah, we don't need. Well, we'll get into that a bit later. Watcher, the empire continues to move forward for you, I understand. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. The world keeps turning despite everyone's best efforts.
Well, good. Glad to hear it. And so with that, let's dive in. If I can ask you to go to the slide on and the next one. We'll talk. We sort of talked about that. So earlier this month, the Russian Foreign Ministry published a new position paper vis-a-vis its foreign policy concept, which sets the sort of underpinning for how they view the role of Russia in the world and those obstacles that are sort of there to meet up with Russia's goals from a foreign policy perspective. And I think many of you have seen this, but it has not been covered too terribly much in the Western press, or at least not in any detail. We're not going to do the deep dive on that tonight. But as you think about sort of the challenges that are facing everybody in the current conflict zones around the world, whether that's Ukraine or Syria or Venezuela or wherever you may be focused on at this particular point, I think it's good to keep this in mind in terms of what are the motivating factors and what are the grievances in a way that Russia wants to put forward in terms of the way that it's acting in a foreign policy world. And the message out of this full stop is they see the United States as its number one enemy on the planet, and really the sort of causative factor behind all of the different coalitions of sanctions and restrictions and adverse actions and provocations, particularly in Europe. And I don't think we have to go back and talk about the genesis of the Ukraine special military operation any further in terms of the allegation that Ukraine was a cat's paw for expansion of NATO to the Russian border, but it's certainly there. So I think you're seeing a more strident Russia, one who's looking to get more involved, sort of take the playbook that Russia's had for the last dozen years and extend it to new areas on the planet, Latin America being sort of first and foremost among them. And I think that the takeaway from this was the very sort of clear call in this for basically putting up a wanted ad in the newspaper and saying, if you're a Latin American country who doesn't want to be subjected to U.S. hegemony anymore, let us know, because we're here to help. And that, along with the Chinese, it's been pretty indicative in terms of what's going on with the remnants of the Monroe Doctrine in Latin America. So much so that I think Lavrov is still in Venezuela today, was in Brazil earlier, and following around after Lula got back from Beijing the week before. And it's pretty clear that our influence in Latin America is not what it was, even to the point where we had to fly down to Paraguay and make sure we bribed them enough to not sever relations with Taiwan and create relations with the mainland. Gentlemen, any comments, any observations on this that you want to make?
I think it's incredibly timely from the standpoint of everybody who's been on the U.S. grift for a decade or two. All of a sudden, they could just throw their hands up and say, "Oh, those terrible Americans! We have an alternative now," and hop over to the alternative. So I think you're seeing a pattern of that in Latin America, Africa, and some parts of Asia.
Yeah, the global South, as it's often referred to.
Yeah, this is another clean start where they can repudiate things like legal exposure, which the Americans are notoriously over legalistic. So it's an interesting time for potentates around the world to say, hey, let's get on this other ship and give it a shot for a while, and let's see
Yeah,
what we can get out of it.
I think the one area though where there's still a hook for the rules-based Western order is a lot of these countries in the global South still need the IMF or something like the IMF. Because when they get sideways economically, and when we talk about debt later in the show, um, when they need to sort of be bailed out, for lack of a better word, that's not very sensitive on my part, but that's what it is in many instances. It's the IMF who's there to sort of do that. Now, it's interesting to me that one of the things that came out of the Brazilian state visit to China was the sort of re-emphasis or new emphasis on what's being called euphemistically the BRICS Bank, right?
Yep. Yes.
And so the BRICS Bank has been sort of created. Ultimately, it's not yet, but ultimately to sort of play the role of an alternative to the IMF for those in the new Global South Alliance who need that sort of economic, mRNA vaccine shot from time to time.
As a security consultant, I wish they would have called me first, because my first advice to them would have been, don't hire the woman who went to prison for embezzling billions to be the first president of your bank. But they did it anyway.
Yeah.
So,
It's
they've made a couple.
That was part of Lula's deal to be the regional manager for China. So
yeah,
they've made a couple of really bad bets on branding, but that doesn't matter. I mean, they named the bank after Hans Blix, so Blix Bank, and that'll come to pass. It's going to be Team Not America in this case. No,
yeah. I think
hard.
I think for those of us who've spent a lot of time in these global South countries, the sensitivity around the sort of moralistic aspects of a bank that's willing to lend you money evaporate pretty quickly when they've got somebody on the line that will talk to them and maybe give them money. And one of the things that Dilma's pretty good at is arranging. She's no slouch when it comes to the Biden 10% plan. And so,
right.
There is a lubricant in the midst of that bank's management there that sort of makes it easier to get along with without, as Jim likes to say, the overt moralizing on every other topic.
Well, I'll tell you too that with most of South America, well, actually 100% of South America being predominantly Catholic, they also like the fact that a loan from the BRICS group isn't going to come with the strings they do from others. You don't have to have a pride parade. You don't have to invest in lesbian transgender poetry. They don't play those games in those markets. So
they make different demands though. So
they do.
That's true.
But their demands, they tend to be demands that these people are already familiar with and or have faced on their way to leadership in their country. So
absolutely.
It's the known, to use a Rumsfeldian phrase. So
it's more familiar actually than the American demands. The American demands are almost extraterrestrial to some of these people. And they've tolerated it because it was the lender of last resort for a long time, right?
Yeah, I was looking at I tuned into Fox earlier today because I wanted to watch some of it before they go out of business, having to pay $800 million to Dominion voting systems, and so JD Vance was on, I guess it's Jesse's show, but he wasn't there, and he was in a 2-shot with a tape, and they were talking about this very thing in the context of the woman who's the ambassador to Ghana, and that's Shirley Temple's old job, if I remember correctly, had taped a Ramadan message to the Muslim population of Ghana, and was sort of going full play acting, with the robe and the whatever, and and JD Vance was talking about the fact that nothing is more insulting to these people than liberal white women play acting like they really care about these issues, and then laying on top of that the social construct that's important to the State Department in America today, and then just driving a wedge between them. So We
Like
shall see.
Justin Trudeau, liberal white woman who dresses up as other cultures.
Yeah, exactly so. But I to come back to the point here, and that is Russia has taken a pretty strident position at this point, and certainly may not have the chops to execute on everything that it wants to do, but has demonstrated its ability to punch above its body weight, I think, in a lot of different ways. Not always in overt military power, but as we see in Africa, they've been able to sort of stir up problems, certainly for the French in former Francophone Africa, and maybe increasingly now in Sudan with their friendship with Hamedi, leader of the RSF. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this. So on one hand, they're stirring stuff up, and on the other hand, they're knitting together people like Assad and MBS. So it's been pretty effective. It's certainly more effective than much of what we've done diplomatically in the 2 years of the Biden administration.
Well, they've been able to pull a great deal of gravity into the Middle East, and I think that's one of the interesting things about Turkey. Is everybody thought that the polarity of power would just spin right to Asia, and what you have is it's kind of gotten stuck just south of the Caucasus, and everybody is in this tight scramble now to figure out what the pathways look like between what was Western dominance for the last century or so and this migration back to the east. I'm pretty amazed.
And it's really amazing when you consider that for a good 10 to 12 years, Russia was shut out.
Oh yeah, it was not an issue. It was
not an issue in the Middle East.
It was a multi-time zone vacuum.
Yeah.
But I think we're done with that.
And they saw the opportunity. They held their nose. They embraced Assad, and they sent a message to everybody like Assad that says, "If we're on your side, we're on your side." And you can be vile, you can be whatever, you can be maybe not even all that smart, but if you're our guy, you're our guy. And the same thing that they've done with Iran, and I think that's really won people over in terms of their willingness to sort of engage with these folks and stay on side. So it's an interesting venue from that perspective. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. I think the Japanese are nervous. The Pacific Fleet was out about a week ago and conducting live fire exercises within shouting distance of northern Japanese islands, and so it's robust as robust can be at this particular point. So I think I grudgingly sort of admire what they've been able to do when I think they're not holding a flush for a lot of reasons, and would that we could extract as much effectiveness out of our foreign policy that they have out of theirs.
Yeah, they're not holding a flush, but now they have a bank.
They do. They do.
It's hard to underestimate that.
Yeah.
They've got a bank, and it's backed by the largest economy in the world. If you want to argue against the Indians, they're in a very unique position.
Well, let's peel that back a little bit, and that is the BRICS nations' GDP exceeds the G7.
Yeah.
And if you listen to Blinken and we throw the Chinese out of the G7, then it's certainly the G6 is not going anywhere fast, right?
And if you look at growth and you look at demographics, it ain't pretty.
No. It's interesting, all the people who talk about the Chinese birth rate and the demographic problem, and then just sort of look past the Japanese, right? With no thought whatsoever as to what's going to happen in Japan, who's got it worse off than the Chinese do from that perspective. And so I find it remarkable. So I think this is probably enough on this topic. I just want to make people aware, watch this space. We'll dig into this a little bit more in detail when we get to it. But I think it's something that over the next couple of months, the balance of 2023 is probably going to become more to the forefront as the manifestations, the actual external forms of this policy statement come into focus. And the one thing that may play havoc with that is something that I think is a real sleeper issue for all of us, and that is the upcoming elections in Turkey. And I'd like to take you through sort of what the manifestation of the different outcomes in the Turkish election may mean for a whole host of sort of regional and global hotspots that Erdogan has been pretty good, much like Putin, of sort of sticking his nose in beyond his true capacity to project power. So the yeah, Mr. Scott, I talked to Chet. He's not going to be able to be here today, but he'll be back, and he's coming back with what I think is going to be a wonderful video introduction, predicated on his performance in his debut, and you can look forward to that. But back to Turkey for a minute. Turkish elections, we've all sort of known they were there. They sort of snuck up on us, and they'll take place in about 3 weeks' time. May 14th, I think, is the date. And it's a real horse race. I mean, for the last 10 years or so, there hasn't been much question as to how Turkish elections were going to come out. Erdogan, particularly after the coup in 2016, really has had control over the election function within Turkey. But it's a funny thing. 50% annualized inflation, an economy that sort of reflects 50% annualized inflation, high interest rates, even though they should probably be higher, and two 7.8% earthquakes will do a lot to sort of undo the solidity of your political support, particularly when the response to the latter is sort of muddled up in terms of how it actually gets rolled out. And you notice we don't hear anything about those earthquakes any longer. I don't remember the last time we've had 2 7+ earthquakes in coincidence with each other, and yet we don't hear much about what's going on in Turkey with respect to the response. Yeah, and Mergut makes a good point. So the opposition candidate, Kilishar, I'm terrible with Turkish pronunciation by design and by ethnic persuasion.
I'm intentionally bad at it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we'll just call him Kamal because that's his first name. And he is old, and he's not had a great election record. He's lost, I think, 9 of his last 10 elections, but he's hung around. And broken clock could be right at 2 points during the day. And his basic pitch to the Turkish people is, "Have you had enough of Erdogan? And wouldn't you like to get back to?" And his party is the People's Republic Party, which is the historic party of Kemal Ataturk, who founded the modern Turkish state back in the 20s and founded it as a secular nation. And so with Erdogan, you've had this great drift towards pan-Islamism, and it's got benefits, it's got prices associated with it. But I think people may have just Erdogan fatigue in terms of both what they view as the international adventures that they've undertaken, and the inability or the unwillingness to either strengthen the lira or deal with inflation or deal with economic problems at home. So, Jim, anything you want to add to that in terms of observation on the state of play in Turkey?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting time for the Turks because they're a very competent industrial power, regional power, and they haven't performed well over decades. There've been some large families that did well, but it's been a very tight economy.
Yeah, but even those large families, and I have a relationship with one of them, this has been tough for them.
Very hard.
It's been very tough for them, and the relationships that they've had with Western companies like Ford Motor have been strained in this context, and their push into Western Asian countries, even their push into Moscow with their retail arm, has been hindered by a whole range of things. And so it's not been the greatest of times for the big Turkish conglomerates.
They're still big.
Short of telecom.
They're still big and they're still in charge, right?
Yeah, they're not going anywhere.
You see, that's the interesting thing I think that people in the United States and Europe sometimes miss is it may be a couple of decades of difficulty, but the big commercial families, the property owners, the asset owners, the people who are kind of critical infrastructure for any political party, they don't change easily.
No.
And they can weather this because they own the assets. So it's been interesting, and I don't think people understand how powerful the commercial arm of Turkish society is into the Middle East. How much of the consumer goods, how much food, and I think we kind of caught a whiff of it when the Ukraine conflict popped up, just based on the commodity flow through the Bosphorus and the ties to Turkish companies. And I think most Americans would have looked at it and said, okay, it's going to be a hard time for the Turks. But the people who got to be the inefficient intermediaries of non-compliant trade, right? So who took advantage of all the currency exchange options and the availability of commodities. Incredible moneymaker. So there's an immense amount of liquidity now.
I'm sorry, Watcher, what's up?
Oh, sorry about that. I'm screening a call and I didn't realize my mic was on.
No, that's okay.
Just an immense amount of liquidity is drifting around the Middle East. And the Turks have been a beneficiary of that. And they were a beneficiary of our policy in Syria. So, they make it work around, the big powers. And they've done well on keeping on side vis-a-vis Russia and keeping on side with us by leveraging NATO. So I think it's a really interesting political situation.
So I think we've all been around long enough. We sort of know where Erdogan comes out on this, and we know sort of what his ambitions are. Well, if we want to spend a few minutes on that, we can. But he's all about sort of putting the Ottoman Empire back together again, one way, shape, or form or another, and has been very, very robust in his support of Azerbaijan and its conflict with Armenia. And so what caught my attention here was this article in the Cradle. And I would suggest to you, you could do worse than to sort of pop in and read what's in the Cradle from time to time. It's a very different point of view than what we get in the Western media, and very focused on West Asia and the Middle East. But it's an interesting point of view that sometimes helps you sort of think about things in a more balanced way. But Erdogan is introduced a lot of Islamic overtones, I think, to Turkish society, which didn't exist 30 years ago. I think the big thing is that he's taken what had been a traditional sort of parliamentary structure and turned it into much more of an executive presidency, and he's done that on the basis of his party, the AKP, having a majority for most of the time he's been the president. I mean, the president of Turkey was sort of like the president of Greece, ceremonial in nature, but not a whole lot of power. And now he's basically, got his application into the Autocrat of the Year club. And so that this is all things that the opposition thinks that the Turkish people have seen enough and had enough over the last 10 years. And so to go to Murgut and I think PD's point in the chat, Kemal is viewed as sort of a long in the tooth politician. I started to say something and I changed my mind. So I'll use a different analogy. A seasoned, known quantity in the political sphere in Turkey, and somebody that can be, and he's already said he's running for one term. He's not going to run again. Stop me when this sounds like somebody else you've heard. And he views his role as being the helmsman that puts Turkey back on the path towards being a parliamentary democracy once again. So this 6-party coalition, and we'll see in the next slide, which we can probably go to if you have a minute, Watcher. This is a whole bunch of mumbo jumbo on sort of polling opportunities or polling outcomes in Turkey, which you don't have to really focus on. But the three things that are important is you see the three main alliances in the center there: the People's Alliance, which is the CPC and other related parties, and then the People's Alliance, I'm sorry, which is the AKP, and then the other alliance, which is the 6 parties that are in opposition. Their whole goal is to deconstruct Erdoganism. And I was talking to Watcher before the show. Some of the planks in this platform are to re-up the application to join the European Union, which I was a little surprised at. As I said, to sort of create primacy of the parliament and the prime minister more so than the executive power of the president by deconstructing all the legislation that has taken place to sort of fortify the executive branch and to create an independent judiciary. And then some other things that are sort of interesting. There's been some talk of normalizing relations with the Armenians and opening the border, which not everybody in Turkish society is going to be excited about. But the fact that it's even been talked about, along with some people actually talking about recognizing the genocide, gives you, I think, some view on how far this opposition has come to saying we've had enough of Erdogan's sort of strident Islamism in our country. And the concept of, people, we joke about this. Why in God's green earth would anybody want to be part of the EU? Well, I think the answer to that is if you're living under 50% inflation, being part of the Eurozone and being tied to the euro is probably not a bad look from that perspective. So it's very interesting. Two very stark sort of looks at a direction forward for Turkey, and the Azeris are really worked up about it in the context of if the opposition were to win, the sort of strident support for Azerbaijan and the creation of this pan-Turkish corridor all the way to Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, that goes on the ash heap pretty quickly. So interesting times.
So yeah, a couple of people have asked about inflation in Turkey, and it's massive.
It's 50%. It's running at a 50% annual rate.
Yeah. And I don't think people understand the visual on that. Is it's a chart that runs almost vertically.
Yep.
And staples are being hurt. They're available, but the prices of the staples go up because the currency is vulnerable. And so the government subsidizes a lot of this stuff. So somebody had asked a question about bread prices. So yeah, you can get cheap bread, but can you get enough of the cheap bread that's subsidized? And then non-subsidized products, you got to pay hard currency for it.
Well, and some of that cheap bread has been helped off by the fact that certain amounts of Ukrainian exports never make it out of Turkey, right?
Shrinkage.
Right.
Yeah, there's shrinkage. And so, there's a lot of ways for things to happen in Turkey. So I think I think people are tired, quite honestly. And I think they may have reached the point where they don't see the benefit in their life of the things that Erdogan likes to talk about as sort of manifestations of his leadership in terms of Turkey's increased importance on the world stage, where he's been able to stick his nose into things like Finland's accession to NATO and Sweden's accession into NATO, and his activities with the Kurds both in Iraq and in Syria. There's a lot of things I think that you could see rolled back in a more Western-leaning secular sort of state that is more parliamentary based, which is what the opposition would like to do. So this is going to have a lot of impact, and so we'll see. Polls are polls, but Kemal seems to be anywhere from 2 to 5 points ahead at this particular point now, some 3 weeks out. And in the parliamentary elections, you've got probably the opposition party with enough votes if their coalition holds together to have a parliamentary majority on the current pace. And I would look for a real push from Erdogan in the last couple of weeks to be giving away stuff and what have you, the traditional electioneering in Turkey. But we'll see how it goes. Let's go to the map, because I want to talk about this, because I think it's important to sort of realize
map segment.
Everywhere you see a crescent is a point on this map that this election could have an impact on. It could be a material change in the construct of the pathway forward in Ukraine, because Turkey sort of played both ends against the middle, and a very more pro-NATO, reliable NATO partner in Turkey has the ability to get stickier as it relates to the Bosphorus and what goes in and out of the Black Sea, and also in terms of just assistance to Ukraine. I think that takes a while, and it may take time that the Ukrainians don't have, but that's certainly the way forward. and the issues with Iran and the Azeris make a big difference, and the economic sort of expansion into Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan probably has it. The question will be really interesting, both as it relates to EU membership and NATO position, is how do they mend fences with the Greeks? Because that's a tricky issue as well. So
I mean, they were shooting at each other 6 weeks ago. So
yeah. But I think that's the benefit of a parliamentary system, and say those guys are out of power, and it's our turn at this particular point. But it's also interesting to see what happens with the Kurds. If there's a more level-handed approach to the Kurds out of Turkey, and 3 of those crescents, Syria, Iraq, and Eastern Turkey, is a pretty big swath of the Kurdish population. So it has an impact there that's not inconsequential. And last but not least is Turkey's support for the opposition in Libya. It'll be interesting to see how strong that remains. So that's kind of what we'd like you to think about a little bit as we get a little closer to Turkish elections. We'll do we won't quite do the Fox News desk, and I don't want to get sued by whatever the equivalent of Turkey's Dominion voting system is, but we'll keep an eye on the outcomes here, and we'll be ready to talk about it in about 3 weeks' time. Any last comments before we leave this?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what you said. The man is trying to rebuild the Ottoman Empire, one Turkmen at a time, right? He wants to run all the way across from China to Greece, and he's going to do what he can to make it happen. He sees himself as the new caliph.
Yeah, that's certainly been the message for the last decade or so. The question will remain, whether or not the Turkish people share that vision or not, or they're much more concerned, as Jim says, about the fact that bread's 50% more expensive this year than it was last year.
Well, also remember he put down a pretty intense coup, so he's willing to use violence to meet his goals.
Yeah.
I remember the video of him and his team in DC going after the protesters.
Oh, yes.
On
As a protective detail member, I had to say that was a bit bold of them.
No, they just crossed the street and started beating people to the ground. It was it was a very interesting exhibition of I guess you could call it righteous indignation. I mean, I don't know. But they were aware that they had some extraterritoriality, and they went to town right there in the circle. So
yep. You're like, we got a status of forces agreement. I can kick this dude right in the head. And then they proceeded to.
Yeah, it's the value of Incirlik. Yep.
So Rick, Duke of Malta, has an interesting comment that today, April the 19th, and we talked about this earlier, April the 19th is a pretty heavy history day on a number of
is.
I mean, so the Ottoman Empire was ended, and the secular state of Turkey under Kemal Ataturk came into effect. Odd, the coincidences that happened in that regard, but interesting nonetheless.
Diplomatic immunity. That was pushed pretty hard. They almost had to give a couple of guys up.
Yeah, it was. They tested that theory.
Yeah, absolutely, they did.
No question. All right, let's go to our last slide. We'll take it the next 10 or 15 minutes. I just think it's useful for us to keep an eye on sort of what's going on in financial markets, and the largest financial market is the international debt market, comprising about 133 trillion. And if you look at the pie diagram there, unfortunately, the biggest piece of that is the big blue blob in the middle, which is the 50 trillion or so of U.S. debt that's outstanding at this particular point. That's both U.S. debt and agency debt in aggregate. And behind that, you've got China and some of the other Asian countries. But I think if we could make this a little bit bigger, it's kind of hard to see, I would imagine, on most people's screens.
I don't really have a good way of doing that.
Okay. Maybe I'll put the link in the chat. But the relative weight of debt burden between our country, and yes, we've got the largest economy on the planet, at least for now, and others. It's pretty stark in terms of GDP per capita in a lot of ways, and I just think this is a warning to us in the context of our ongoing negotiations, such as they are, over the extension of the debt ceiling and the risk we run with respect to inadvertently sort of causing a default, even a minor default, on any one series of our many different forms of U.S. sovereign debt really does play havoc, or the potential to play havoc with our well-being. And we've talked about ad nausea the role of the dollar and the declining, the way that people want to get away from the role of the dollar. This could be an accelerant, and it's an accelerant that, if it happens, really doesn't have any good outcomes for U.S. citizens at this point. So,
well, while we're on the topic of debt, what do I get for this CCCP issue 5 ruble note? Did I get anything?
what you can probably do with that is what I've done with a lot of the stuff that I bought, like that Chinese bond on behind me. That's one of several. I mean,
Frame it.
they're great for framing. They make great sort of,
It's got really nice artwork on it.
yeah. It's a great discussion piece. If you can get that in a $100 trillion Zimbabwe dollar note and a couple of other things, and put them in a little sort of, in a little sort of frame situation, hang them over the bar in the basement or whatever you want to do with it. I mean, it's
Or send it to your congressman in the next 3 or 4 weeks. It might be an eye opener for him.
might drive the point home. Now, I did see that the House is going to take up legislation that says that they will increase the debt ceiling by 1.5 trillion, which is an amount that's meant to cover the budget deficit for fiscal 23, which we're in now through September. But we're still going to have to. The Democrats are going to have to agree to a certain level of spending cuts, and I think we heard from Joe Biden today that said, no, we just want a clean extension of.
Yeah, he's not going to visit it.
He's not going to visit it, and I think if the Republicans play their cards right, they can take a level-headed, reasonable approach to this that I think most Americans. Well, I would have said most Americans, but I don't know about that any longer. But many Americans would understand sort of the rational aspect of that, even with the Democrats trying to demagogue them as being sort of firebrand radicals who want nothing more than to pull the temple of the U.S. Treasury down, which is, I don't think, the case. But we shall see. We shall see. I just think this is going to be. I think that there's a great deal of propensity for this to get sideways.
So the question then becomes, are the people who want to make this a shrill effort to create uncertainty, fear, and doubt, are they going to win this battle? Regardless of what the Congress does on the purse strings, are they going to try to spin this into a psychosis or?
Yeah, this is for the Democrats, a psychosis in waiting,
Yeah.
with eyes on the 2024 election, that says you can't trust the Republicans to be in charge because when they are, they create all these arcane obstacles to us spending money to make you better off. Paraphrasing, but that's the message that you're going to get. And I think on the other hand, you've got people who have, and I happen to agree with this, a really genuine sort of case that says we can't continue to borrow at the pace at which we're borrowing, because we can't even, we're soon going to be spending more on interest than we are on defense. And whatever your view on the amount of money we spend on defense, if your interest expense is bigger than that, that's a problem. So $1 trillion a year in interest cost is not money that we get much value for, even if you assume that some of it trickles back into the economy in the hands of Americans who can then go spend it on streaming services and fast food. And
so you can't grow your way out of that, huh?
well, there's oftentimes the argument of saying, you can inflate your way out of it, but we haven't shown the propensity to put up growth numbers. And in light of the tax structures that the Democrats want to create, I don't think we've got the inherent capacity to grow at a rate that's fast enough through productivity that not unless Chat GBT is much more productive as a productivity tool than I think it's going to be. But I don't think we grow our way out of that. We're spending it faster than we can grow.
Yeah, and there doesn't seem to be any desire to expand domestic production of commodities or minerals or energy.
Real stuff that we
Yeah,
talk about all the time.
tangible. There's no desire to expand tangible productivity.
No.
It's a curious dilemma we have, which is
we're willing to spend trillions on unreliable renewable energy schemes, and we're willing to spend more trillions on creating the basis for the metaverse going forward, the AI powered metaverse going forward, but not much more in the way of true productivity by making stuff as opposed to making components of stuff.
Yeah, so they keep talking about reshoring industry. I just haven't seen any action. I haven't seen any construction planning, capitalization. It's just
Well, I think we missed the mark, and that is the primary beneficiaries of deals that I've seen announced for reshoring are Mexico. It's the Maquiladora zone, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know that many people in this chat are going to move to Mexico to get a job at a Ford plant or a Toyota plant or whatever, because Mexico's coming apart at the seams. So
well,
I've been offered a job or two
welcome
in Mexico, but they were not at Ford plants.
I hear you. I hear you.
Working in a Suburban going 70.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Creasy.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Yes.
yeah.
Live like a king down here.
Yeah. So if you know, you know. So that's kind of it. I have some increasing concern about our ability to navigate our way out of our current dilemma with the debt ceiling, and it's really the sort of thing that in times past, six really well-meaning senators and six really well-meaning congressmen from both parties could probably have gotten together over a weekend and come up with it on an envelope in terms of what you could do to make sure that yes, we're gonna meet our obligations, but we're also gonna bring some rationality to the discussion. And the thing that seems to be in short supply on most topics in America today is rationality. So it's the thing that's probably the commodity that we're in shortest supply of.
Well, if there are 12 people involved, I think it would be a conflict of misgendering stance. So it's a non-starter.
Yeah, I'm not very good at worrying about those sorts of things, but okay. All right. So with that, I'm going to open the floor, and I hope Watcher has somebody that's a brave, intrepid traveler who's willing to come on and talk with us about any or all of what we've talked about, or throw us a curveball that we haven't seen coming.
I've got one that's ready to go. Let me get the link to him. Give him a minute to file in here.
Okay. So has anybody been watching baseball under the new rules with the pitch clock and all the other things?
Lord, no. It's baseball. I have far better things to do with my time than watch that slow sport.
Well, the only good thing I can say is that playoff hockey is here.
Yes.
And that is the greatest spectacle in sport in my estimation. So I am pulling for the Boston Bruins to make it all the way through and win the Stanley Cup, because they've had a season that is without peer this year. So it's fun to watch excellence in action.
I've not been watching baseball. It's funny. I've actually been invited to more. I've been invited to more baseball games this year than ever. So just on the baseball call. Sorry, Watcher.
Don't be. Peter says he'll be here in just a second.
All right.
So yeah, I've been invited to a lot of university baseball games this year, and they've been great. It's really I prefer university sports.
Yeah, that little baseball stadium at UVA is a great place to watch a baseball game.
Exceptional. I've
Yeah,
been up to
it really-
DC a couple times, and that's just too big for me.
yeah, it's got all the DC associated with it, but watching a game at UVA is a great place to take in a baseball game. One Easter Sunday, there was a game there, and we watched a guy pitch a no hitter, which tends not to be terribly exciting, but that time it was because there was a kid on the UVA team that threw a no hitter, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, they like to win, and they're very cheerful about it.
Yep.
Hey, Peter.
Hey, we know this guy.
Hey, what? No one
Hey,
else wants to come on?
what a surprise.
So,
What's on your mind, Peter?
my question's actually really off topic, but Watcher said it's open line, so it's open line.
That's exactly right.
Okay, so my question, it's going to be a little bit of a setup, but it's based on the concept of elite capture.
Mm-hmm.
So back in, I think it was 2014, 2015, the Scarborough Shoal incident with Philippines, China, and Philippines took China to the World Court or whatever. They got a junction saying Scarborough Shoals, the Philippines, not China. China had put troops there. Then Obama's like, hey, we're going to cut a deal and everybody's going to leave. And the U.S. Navy was there and the Philippines left and China stayed and the United States Navy left and China stayed. And now China essentially owns the Scarborough Shoal now. And then the revelations or allegations that came out that like $30 million was funneled through a CCP middleman to Obama's campaign. So with all of that being said, how does elite capture, the Biden administration, and a Taiwan blockade play out? Does the Navy not get there in time? Oh no! Oh, they're already on the shore. Oh, guys, we just couldn't do it. Just couldn't make it happen. And they capture it without the U.S. not firing a shot, essentially.
Well, I'm gonna let Jim sort of do a critique of the Scarborough Shoals thing if you want, Jim.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, it's traditional Philippine fishing ground, and I don't think there's much above the surface except a few rocks, and on a low tide day, there's probably a couple sandbars. But what happened is the Chinese wanted to get in close onto Luzon, and so they just decided to grab it. And when we withdrew and the Philippines withdrew, and we kind of said, let's let the fishermen take it, plays right into the Chinese hands because they put the maritime militias forward, and it's just fishing people, right? So the decision was made to kind of de-escalate and let the fishing people sort it out. So the Chinese put, 50 or 60 very large trawlers with no fishing nets and lots of crew, and they park them there 6 to 9 months of the year, and they rotate them back to Hainan. It's a methodology, and so its possession is 9/10 of the law, and they make it very uncomfortable for the Filipinos to be there. And the Chinese Coast Guard shows back up to protect the fishermen who are there, right? So they assert maritime rights. And the desire of the Philippines to kind of play the middle road undercut the UNCLOS thing, the law of the sea argument that the Philippines won. So they really didn't assert it properly. So, it's just more of the same vis-a-vis the South China Sea. They've done it in every conflict. The Vietnamese were the only people who went to fisticuffs with the Chinese, and they were very much alone in that. Malaysians aren't going to do it. Indonesians aren't going to do it by choice. Singapore won't do it. So the Philippines is now letting us base there. At some point, there'll be a conflict in one of these places, and we'll see how it plays out. The Filipinos will be better prepared next time, but it's going to be really, really hard to play with the Chinese because they're there in strength and they've got a lot of different locations. So that's how it played out. Unfair, but just the facts of the game.
That's Scarborough Shoals. Now let me cast forward your question as it relates to what happens if, as, and when the Chinese institute a blockade, and what is the U.S. Navy's response, and is there any impact of what we all feel is some level of elite capture, if not with just Joe and Hunter, then other folks, Mitch McConnell. I think it's hard to say at this particular point. I think we're probably more likely to have logistical and performance issues in terms of arriving in time and enforcing any influence over a blockade, because we're at the long end of a logistics chain with the U.S. Navy versus the short end of a logistics chain with the Chinese Navy. And I think we in the West don't make enough, although I did see a piece on this the other day about the ability or the game changer that is the hypersonic missile capability, anti-ship missile capability that the Chinese have, and its ability to sort of, if not sink a lot of carriers, at least hold them off out of optimal range to be able to be of effect in terms of breaching a blockade. So I think if they get the blockade established, I think that this ends up with Taiwan capitulating out of economic necessity, not necessarily through force of arms. But that's just my view. Joe, I'll leave it to you in terms of taking a different position or not, as that may be the case.
No, I don't. I think they only have to take out one carrier to put an end to our involvement. The American public wouldn't stand for it. We don't have the taste for it. Now, if the Russians sank it, that'd be a different story. But I don't think we have the political will really to fight China, because we haven't been talking about it as long as we have about Russia. I'd also like to go back to the Philippines point and point out that
let me, before you do that, I have a question I'd like to ask of Peter and of the chat in general and my other members of the council here. Do we really think that there's the fervor for Taiwan that is the equivalent of the fervor that's been created for Ukraine? Do we think we've got the capacity to have, the same level of commitment emotionally, financially, and militarily to Taiwan that we've been able to manifest as it relates to Ukraine?
Could it be done? Yeah, absolutely. But the establishment, the whatever you want to call it, uniparty, has chosen to do that for Russia and not for China. And honestly, it seems like only politicos and people who watch this sort of China watchers are even paying attention to any of this. Like, the mass majority of the public maybe hears sees a headline once in a while by Taiwan, but that thing could blow up and it's going to catch a lot of people off guard. I would like to, I don't know if it's really much of a counterpoint, but 3,000 people died on 9/11. That's essentially, one carrier, and we lit the entire Middle East on fire.
We are not the same nation we were then.
That would be my only counterpoint that I would accept. Yeah.
And how many aircraft carriers did the Afghans have? So
I don't know. Wait, how many did we leave over there again? No.
Yeah, but I think something overlooked in the Philippine argument is the Philippine Marine Corps. That's actually a no-joke military organization. It's not very large, but they know their business, and if they decide to take Scarborough Shoal, there's really Scarborough Shoal at this point. If hostilities kicked off, there's not much China could do about it. But they don't have legs to go anywhere else, so they can't make it to Taiwan without lift from us. So,
yeah, and part of the answer to your question about our ability to interdict the blockade got answered today in a news piece that I saw that the Philippine government has sort of felt the need to split the baby on this readiness component of U.S. involvement in these new bases in the Philippines. We can't store any weapons in these new domains for use against Taiwan. So
they shook us down for $82 million just to be able to do it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you knew that.
But this is one of those Chinese interjections into a system, which is, and of course, now that you've made this agreement, that's okay, but you can't pre-position weapons for Taiwan. So what'll end up happening is there will be things there that aren't there, and it'll be a continuous payoff that occurs to make that happen, right? It's the endless breadbasket or rice bowl or whatever you want to call it. And I don't, when people start talking about, Scarborough Shoals, the Paracels et al., they, the fishermen and this, it isn't quaint, right? It isn't the bunch of fishermen. It's 100, 200-foot steel vessels lashed together in big flotillas with armed people aboard them, basically doing eminent domain on these territories. And then they pick up the radio and say, hey, we're having trouble here. There's some Filipino fishermen who want to fish here, or the Philippine Marines is trying to reinforce their decrepit landing barge that's falling apart, or they're trying to bring concrete in to build a runway extension. Then the Chinese Coast Guard shows up, and these are 300, 400, 500-foot modern vessels surrounded by other vessels. So it's not quaint fishermen on fishermen. It's a quasi-military organization, which is the Chinese militia, marine militia, backed by the Coast Guard, and they're layered.
Those ships are up armored as well, right? They've got extra plating on them. They ram other ships all the time and suffer no damage. They have to be up armored.
So you mean it's not like the San Pablo in the Boxer Rebellion, Jim? Is
no, it's not. It isn't the river gunboat. It's more like the Icelandic fish wars.
Main stem Stawal. Yeah.
Main stem. No, this is like the Icelandic fish wars, which is the Icelandics had a couple of what you described as ice reinforced tugboats, and they would just ram people. And they had no weapons basically, but they would go out and physically push vessels out of the way. I think that's what people don't understand here is that dance goes on every day in all of these locations. And that's where the Chinese are very effective. They're everywhere all the time. And the Russians have picked up on everywhere all the time. And that's what we're dealing with now in the Middle East, across Africa and Latin America, is the everywhere all the time game.
Well,
and it's going to be very hard to deal with.
A lot of the emotional attachment to Ukraine is what we mentioned on the CFC at the very beginning. These people look like us. There's a McDonald's there. There's Starbucks there. When you look at a street scene in Ukraine, it could be a street scene anywhere in America. It's not going to look that way in Taiwan. And they're going to say, those people look like those people. Again, they both have China in their names. So this is a them thing. I think that'll play into whether or not we get involved there too. We'll make some token gestures, but I don't see us getting as involved as everyone seems to think we're going to.
Ron, anything for the good and Commonwealth here?
Professor Ron.
Good evening, everybody. I literally just sprinted into the house. I'm still trying to catch my breath, trying to enjoy my first sip of bourbon this evening. It's you're killing me. I mean, teaching high school juniors and seniors, is mentally exhausting. So, and also heard something about fishing boats and tokenism, and Joe says none of us look like them. So I got it.
So it was just a discussion of the maritime militias in the South China Sea and how it isn't quaint fishermen having
I think
having disagreements.
The core of Peter's question was, given the Chinese propensity to get away with stuff, when this comes to a blockade, how robust and effective is our response going to be to sort of breaking this blockade? And does any of that reflect on elite capture and a lack of willingness to press an advantage we might have?
So we're gonna break a Chinese blockade of a bunch of quote unquote fishing vessels, and the Chinese media will go, "Oh my God, look at those mean Anglos! They wiped out all these innocent fishermen," and they'll have appropriate video, probably already made, at a Hollywood theater near you type thing. Yeah, but
in the can,
pretty close.
Yeah, I think our ability to interdict that blockade is going to be slim and none. Within the confines of the time frame in which it has to be interdicted, for Taiwan to have a chance, because once it goes into place, once the anaconda has its coils around you, you're on the clock. And they have 7 days worth of oil and gas and other sorts of motor fuels and 10 days worth of food on that island. And so for us to get geared up, get over there and get after it in that sort of context, I don't think that the USS Milius is going to get this done on its own. So
the question is how
No.
quickly we donate the LCS class to them.
Yeah, LCS.
Hell,
is a
I'm
short
surprised
way
we're
to
not
spell
donating the
target.
LCS right now.
well, what is the attrition rate of LCSs from San Diego to Taiwan?
Yeah.
Well, does that include engine failures?
Yeah, it does.
It just seems to me that if we wanted to have a good chance of winning this fight, we could have, but there's been so much like Obama's pivot to Asia, or the pivot to the Pacific or whatever this big thing was 10 years ago. If it really was what it should have been, I think we could have had the forces and logistics in place to deal with it.
See, I'm not sure, Peter, that was ever had anything to do with Obama's pivot to Asia, because I would offer to you that the people who are in the Biden administration are effectively the Biden administration.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah,
Blinken was there at the conception of the pivot. He's proven to be absolutely ineffective in executing on any mission he's given. So I don't know how we think that this is going to be something where we're going to get hyper effective and hyper productive just because it happens to be Taiwan who's being strangled in the crib.
I don't know if I'm articulating it. It just seems to me that China already won the war 10 years ago. That the whole pivot to Asia, all of this stuff with Taiwan is both a grift for major end item weapons purchases for the military industrial complex, and it's just all a dog and pony show. And we could have, had we done this 10 years ago, yes, we could have probably had a good chance of successfully dealing with a blockade or an invasion or whatever, but it just seemed like a big dog and pony show, and it just seems like people got paid off to look like they're doing something about it, rah, when in the end, it just seems like everything's a grift, and hey, I'll pretend to do something about Taiwan, pay me on the backside between a couple of intermediaries. The Ukraine thing, which should have been diplomatically settled a year ago, but let's keep the war going. And it just seems like the political class knows the ship is sinking, and they're just trying to steal as much silverware as possible. And hey, if they're going to blatantly sell out the country and the country's national interests to include their allies, then screw it, we'll do that too. It just seems like old big dog and pony show for the past decade plus.
Yeah, I'm hard pressed to poke holes in your theory, and which is a sad commentary. But I don't think that I think that you're more right than wrong in your assessment here. And I don't think that the American people have the stomach to sort of take on, because I think by definition our involvement in Taiwan is going to be direct involvement. There's no way to technically assist the Taiwanese into there's not 40 million Taiwanese, right? And so I just think that by definition our involvement, if we are involved in Taiwan, that it's a frontline exercise, and one that we're we're going to experience things that we haven't experienced since World War II. And I don't think the American people have the stomach for that. I think cheerleading the Ukrainians, from the safety of social media and spending money that we don't know that we don't have, and deploying munitions that we can't replace hasn't really hit the public consciousness yet, outside of a few places like this place. But I think the fact that that you're going to have direct conflict involvement in Taiwan is a whole different.
When China and nuclear power plants through hacking or through agents here, whichever they choose, it's really going to change the calculus on our side of the ocean.
Well, I think when an Aleutian Island goes up in a mushroom cloud as a demonstration,
Yeah.
that could be That's a
I
whole
feel
different.
like that would backfire, though. I feel like
Really?
the best way to deal with it, and it seems like a Chinese way to deal with it, would be to blockade and then be like, this is a internal Chinese problems. You imperialists don't get involved, and they do not attack the United States overtly in any way. Now, may there be some cyber attacks that's a blackout or some things that are plausibly denial? Yeah, absolutely. But
Well, I think the issue would be
if,
that the people who would take out an Aleutian Island would probably be the North Koreans on order from the Chinese. So
Yeah.
but I feel like even with today's population, yeah, granted the coasts, we can write them off. But if there was anything, especially from a state actor, that was even remotely on the scale of 9/11, you might get a major push for war the establishment never wanted to get on. The amount of blood lost to see a nuke go off, I mean, random guy in North Carolina or Missouri you're never going to hear the end of it. Like this whole Bud Light bullshit, Dylan Mulvaney, and it's that. But you're going to see a nuke go off in Alaska. No, I don't think that would be a smart move at all for the CCP.
You're thinking like a U.S. person, not a Chinese person.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, think about this. So I'm a Chinese guy, and I'm President Xi, and we lob an ICBM, SRBM, I don't care, whatever range missile it is, with a small kiloton warhead at a relatively uninhabited island of the Aleutian chain. And then it goes up, and of course the Biden administration goes, bah, and Tony Blinken has a heart attack and falls over dead, and the village cheers. No kidding, but
wait, this might be good.
Yeah, no, exactly. But seriously, and then the Chinese at the same time transmit a message to Washington D.C. and the other Western capitals and their new ally, in Paris, and say, hey, this is just a demonstration of our power and might. You will let us do what we need and want to do vis-a-vis Taiwan, the renegade province, and we will let the trade flow unimpeded. We will let the spice flow, to use a Dune quote, through through past Singapore up to Japan and South Korea and onward. And there's nobody's going to have the stomach for that. Like, oh, okay, never mind. We really don't want to ratchet it up right now. And the battle for Taiwan is a battle of logistics and the tyranny of distance. I mean, our nearest base is Guam, and yeah, okay, and that can be just as isolated as quickly as Taiwan can, just by
It's
the
still in range of land-based missiles from China.
Yeah.
But do you really think the Chinese would be that in your face and overt about it? I feel like
I think it's an option.
Chinese way of war is more about elite capture, subversion, gray zone warfare, that sort of thing. That's nuking something seems more like an overt Western or Russian, sort of. Maybe.
Hey, where did the G7 meet this weekend? Do you know? In Japan. In Japan.
Yep.
Yeah, but where in Japan? They met in Hiroshima.
It's probably one of two cities. I see where you're going.
Yeah, they met in Hiroshima. So people's memories are not what you think they are sometimes.
They gave it a glowing review.
They did.
Are you busting on my age again, Stan?
No, I'm not, Ron. We're close enough that I don't have the ability or the authority to do that. So I'm not being ageist with you in the least. But I think that rather than get into a slug it out with the U.S. Navy in that area, if things got a little dicey down there, I just pulled this out of thin air. I'm not saying that this is dogma. But you have to remember that Xi's commentary at the National Party Congress was taking Deng Xiaoping's statement and policy of we will hide our strengths and bide our time, literally ripping it up on the floor and saying our new policy is dare to fight. And I don't know that you can circumscribe anything that they might choose to do in a context of, because what you miss in that quotient is, what does that do for the Chinese morale, right? So the context
Yeah.
of the fighting, sort of, the call to action from a Chinese populist perspective. And that
Yeah.
is, we whacked the Golden Mountain. We whacked them a good one. And
Yeah.
thankfully not 100,000 people died, but we just showed them that we're not to be messed around with.
We
there's
finally
Yeah, the
threw up
100
the
years of
last yoke of
humiliation
Western
is over.
imperialism.
And
yeah, the centuries of humiliation are over. Thank you very
Look,
much.
I'll toss another one on top of this, which is, again, and I said this a long time ago, and it's been a while since I brought it up, but China's first use of nuclear weapons policy, if translated accurately, states that any guided weapons, be them ballistic or otherwise, will be responded to with nuclear fire.
There you are.
So yeah,
Oh.
it's one of the big questions I think that folks are dealing with is how do we respond? And I think where we're really not very good is at getting everybody aboard anymore. We're kind of, I've always described it as the Americans show up and insist on playing quarterback. And when we had the checkbook and we had the depth of power, I think, great. We could be a rule setter. We really got to get the Japanese, the Koreans, the Filipinos, the Vietnamese kind of on board with we're trying to be on the side of long-term righteousness, and describe righteousness any way you want, but you've got to have an alternative pitch to what the Chinese have been successful at doing, which is growing, producing an economy, and producing an alternative to what the Americans have been selling for a long time. And we really haven't pitched well. And we definitely don't play well as a participant. We play well as a rule setter. And I think the transition to being a team player is going to be very hard for us. And you see the Chinese throwing rocks at AUKUS, right? Oh, the Americans are going to do this nuclear agreement with the British and the Australians. It's really hard to do these sharing agreements. We're just terrible at it, honestly. We had a couple of good adventures post World War II, but there are not a lot of new ones. And we name them, but then we come out, we have to run them. And our systems just don't do well in this arena where we may not be able to be the point of the spear on every exercise. And I toss that out to you guys who've done the Pentagon time. I personally don't see how we do it. I think we're trying to do it with the Philippines right now. I think we've done a decent job of motivating the Japanese. Japanese are all in on what we're talking about.
15 years late, Jim.
But exactly. But harmonizing that, not easy at all. And it's a game of catch up.
Are you picking on me because I did a tour at the Pentagon working for the chairman?
No. Well, I didn't know you could tie a tie, Ron, but I'm good. I'm good with you.
Thank God for clip-ons. I have.
So
the chairman
Peter,
was Dwight Eisenhower.
I will tell you one thing, that the Pentagon is the biggest suppository, and I did use that word, for groupthink, and do not think out of the box. Oh my God, do not offer an alternate theory of the crime, no matter how implausible or how unrealistic, and stop being like Tom Clancy. Come on, adhere to doctrine. This is the way we've always done it since, Custer defeated the Indians at the Little Bighorn, or something like that. Yeah. Whatever Dempsey yelled at me about. Never seen a little short Irishman yell at you. That's always
cavalry was used, right?
Yeah.
Something like that.
But let me go back to Peter's
he did
comment,
seem a little short.
If you take the example, and that's all it was, of a nuke on the Aleutians off the table, then what's the other Chinese potential response as it relates to the American homeland? Well, we have 2,000.
Yeah.
We have Well, you don't have to do that. You can be more proactive than that. We have 2,000 military-aged Chinese coming across the border a week at this point. Okay. What about the ability to sort of do special ops in this country? We've talked about train derailments. We've talked about all the rest of this sort of stuff, and to combine that with cyber ops. So the Russians hit a couple of buttons and the Colonial Pipeline went down. So I think our ability to interdict Taiwan is pretty slight, and it could be It'll be really messy for 10 days, at which point our inventory of the very valuable, high-value weapons that we rely on will be shot. And we'll say, well, wait right here. We'll be back in 5 years when we've replenished, and we'll pick it up where we left off, pal. I mean, it's just not plausible.
And Walmart in the meantime goes dry.
Well, Walmart looks like Walmart in Chicago.
So no, the
Cool.
difficulty we have is we've talked a good game about resourcing and reshoring and all this stuff, and we've done zero.
Oh yeah.
So the things that matter, complex manufacturing, we've done very, very little work. But again, a lot of money's gone into industry. It's just been misallocated, and it appears that's going to continue because from what I see on the investment and the focus of programs is it's all, if it has the word climate in front of it, perhaps, if it has the word that associates it with DEI, perhaps, but functional industrial repositioning, I just don't see it happening. So again, it's time scale. And I think the embarrassment about Taiwanese buying goods and us being 7 to 10 years behind on delivering systems, and the audacity to say, well, we're going to send another, $600 million worth of goods to Ukraine next week.
We're going to be down to German helmets and blankets.
Yeah, I'm just not sure how you have that conversation in front of the Senate, or maybe the Senate, but I don't know how the Congress sits there and nods their heads, because
I'm pretty sure the Ukrainians have a surplus of German helmets,
and that's good steel. The problem is you got to burn carbon to get the energy to turn it into something else if you need it.
All right. I think we can put a pin in this. I'd like to get to some other folks. Peter, I thank you very much. You're always good to have on, and thanks for your thoughts. And I think you kicked off a good conversation here. But if I can, I'd like to ask us to let somebody else get a shot at coming in. Thank you, sir. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Peter.
Well, unfortunately, we have 2 other people who wanted to come in, but Jasup's having technical issues and can't seem to make it work. And the other person says that you answered their question as per Turkey during your preamble.
Where's Don? Don the plebe. We need to get Don in here.
Yeah,
Did he
come on,
leave?
Don. Don's in the chat harassing poor Ron.
Okay.
As you should.
Is that his calling?
Yeah.
Well, Don should know that he now has a link in his Twitter DMs.
He does.
Ron, you didn't win tonight either at the Tom Selleck contest?
No, I had an American Legion function I had to go to.
Hey, they sent me some mail today. Does that mean I'm old?
No, it just means you're eligible. It just, you can be anywhere from 18 to 80 and be part of the Legion.
No, I know. Actually, a lot of younger guys have really been pushing to get me to come join their Legion things. So,
well, you should.
Cool.
You should. And I got elected vice commander. Fuck.
How about that?
Yeah, big deal.
It's almost as good as teaching high school, Ron.
Oh, which I did today. And in fact, one of my classes was on World War II. And the kids, for God, zero curiosity, zero interest in World War II. I sat there and I'm subbing for the regular teacher. So I reintroduced World War II because they're like, we hate this. I go, you guys are the ones who signed up for this class. The whole class is World War II. It's not just a segment of something larger. It's World War II. It's a whole semester of World War II. I said, hey, this was the seminal event of the 20th century and in recent U.S. history that took the United States from an isolationist continental power hiding behind the oceans and turned us into a global superpower. Yeah, I mean, we can all disagree with that, but I'm trying to inspire these guys going, oh, cool. That's why my cousins based in Germany or in South Korea, or, my uncle went to the Philippines during the Vietnam War and brought back some Filipino
Herpes.
war bride.
Oh,
yeah, and
no.
that too. Yeah, her name is Miss Herpes.
1968.
1968, yeah. But, and so we said, well, I said, so what questions do you have about it? And explain to me Lend-Lease and the arsenal of democracy. And it goes right to what we were just discussing is like, Yeah, we could do all this back then, and not not now. I mean, good Lord, we we'll be lucky if we last, like you say, a week to 10 days. And I don't care how much bombast the generals and the admirals, speak before Congress and in their press releases that bombast is not going to replace actual bombs.
No,
So how long does it take, Ron? How long does a redirection spin up take without conflict? So given that you're not in conflict, given that you're ahead of it, how long does it take to reorient an economy?
I would say 10 years at least.
Yeah,
With
so it's a decade long thing.
with unshakable and unwaverable political will and leadership.
Yeah, that's the point I was going to make, and that is we haven't shown the stick-to-itiveness on anything for a decade except for social spending. So I don't know that we've got, absent a conflict manifesting itself at our door, I don't know that we've got the wherewithal to, because we're going to get down to choosing between $1 for defense, $1.50 for interest, $2 for entitlements, repeat. Right? That's going to be the asset allocation game in DC in the next 4 to 5 years. And I don't know where it comes from, unless they're going to turn the money presses back on. I don't know where the money comes from to do the things that have to be done to sort of replenish what we've frittered away.
Squandered.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think the point was made that we're now learning that we always talk about we're a team of teams, we're allies and this and that, but as long as we're the quarterback, as long as we're calling the plays, and now suddenly maybe we won't be able to. I mean, so there's something going on with China, and we surge forces out to Japan, Guam, and those cool new places we can use in the Philippines, and maybe some to Australia and Malaysia and places like that. And the Filipinos go, yeah, okay, here's the restrictions we're going to place on the use of your forces launching from our geographic territory. And so it's it'll be an interesting development.
PD, I think the reparations are going to be handled via Walmart. I think we're just going to open up Walmart stores and let people take reparations in kind. So, Joe, you're silent, not muted, but silent.
That's literally what the new mayor of Chicago said one time a couple of years ago.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Man, crazy.
And he's the mayor of Chicago.
So yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see this new dynamic vis-a-vis the Philippines, because I think it's going to be a model for the way we work if they can make it work. But I think you're right, Ron. I think it's going to be really hard to manage.
Oh yeah,
we don't have
those.
We don't have the
change.
skills.
They'll change their mind in a second.
Well,
I mean,
Pentagon doesn't have the skills.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, so I think you're right. I think it's going to be. We're going to overstep badly in a lot of ways, and we're going to not execute well. But Joe was talking earlier about the Philippine Marines. They've got great potential, and they've been engaged in conflict domestically for decades, right? So they've always been the guys who went down to Holo and Davao, and
right. But they've also but their conflict is just like our recent, conflict. It's all counterinsurgency. It's all counterterrorism. It's small unit actions. I mean, I was there for the hostage rescue of the Burnhams, working with the Phil Marines and the Phil SEALs, which the U.S. SEALs I was working with. Every time I'd nudge them off to the side and say, "Man, these guys are just like you." And they would say, "Hey, we need you to go reset the targets for our pistol range."
I know, and they're like 5'4", but they're just like you.
but my God, did they have chest bling? Did they? Oh, they had more scare badges than Carter has liver pills. It was impressive.
The thing that always caught me about the Philippine Marines is that you'd have these small guys well disciplined, and their M14s were taller than they were. You know,
Oh yeah.
so it was one of those physical things. You'd see them and go, "Wow, they're very competent." But boy, those M14s were much bigger than them, and they carried them forever. It was something they didn't want to give up, which I found very interesting.
Good stopping. We had well, not we. The U.S. forces had M14s in the early days in Iraq. A lot of units used them for reach out and touch someone if you care to send the very best. So.
Too funny. Well,
Yeah,
I'm gonna say that's kind of the thing that we don't know yet, is how our allies in Asia react.
Oh yeah.
But
I mean, the Chinese will play the diplomatic games. You know, they're the 900-pound gorilla that's in the cage next to you, and the United States, well, we're somewhere over the horizon. And I mean, I could see Japan, for all its puffery and talking about rearming and everything, is basically interning, neutering the U.S. forces based on the islands of Japan.
there's always that card, and that's one of the interesting things vis-a-vis outside the country, is we just don't have the. Well, France did it to us.
Oh yeah.
65, 66. They basically said go away. It looks like they may be doing it again. So, I mean, I'm not sure how that's going to impact NATO, but we're going to have to figure out a way to coalesce these allies, and not a la George Bush, but in a much more long-term national level commitment. And I haven't seen anything. I haven't seen policies. I haven't even seen language.
So let me pose a question. This is going to be a hypothetical, and it's going to be one that's going to have some hyperbole attached to it, but it's being done to illustrate a point. Okay. So I hear, Jim, I hear you talk about, us undertaking a half a decade to a decade long effort of let's just call it building a Pacific NATO sort of structure. Maybe that term is offensive, but it's essentially what we're talking about with the Australians and the Philippines and the Japanese and all that process. And we still don't yet know what's going to get resolved in Eastern Europe as it relates to the Ukraine, and we've got issues still in the Middle East with a rising Iran and sort of a pan-Arabism, pan-Islamism sort of coming to play with the Saudis and the Syrians and the Saudis and Hezbollah and Hamas this week, which is really pretty interesting. So how does the United States, who from a domestic perspective is coming apart at the seams, how does it walk and chew gum at the same time in terms of a cohesive effort to project power through allies in the context of a sort of coherent strategy vis-a-vis China and Russia and Iran simultaneously? Because I don't see that. I don't see how that works. If we've got people looting Walmarts in Chicago and mass shootings and all the attendant sort of, even if they're legitimate shootings, all the attendant sort of social disruption imported from Antifa and BLM in major American cities going on at the same time. I think the last time we did this or tried this on a scale that really wasn't as broad as what we're trying now was 1968 and 69. When the country was coming apart and we were fighting the Vietnam War. We didn't do either one of them very well. How do you expect to do this, what you're talking about, in the context of domestic challenges and international challenges simultaneously? I don't see it.
Well, that was the word I used earlier, which is hopeful. But yeah, I agree with you. It's going to be very hard, but you can't look at things and say there's no option.
I didn't say there was an option. I just think that the options are limited, and I think that the traditional American hubris as it relates to that, we're going to tackle every topic that's out there to be tackled, and we're going to do it with aplomb, is, I think we've frittered that away. We've got domestic issues that are tearing this country apart, and we seem to be spending no time on reconciling those issues. Rather, we seem to be arming up to send one part of the populace after the other. And I don't know how. I don't know how you manifest leadership in a new global alliance against the Chinese in the Pacific at the end of an 8,000-mile logistics chain and do that well, when the feedback from, it's not Tokyo Rose, but the feedback from domestic U.S. politics to troops on the ground over there is, hey, Baltimore burned down today. So how do you square that?
Well, I think we lost Detroit during the Vietnam War, didn't we, Joe?
Twice.
Part of it.
Yes, twice.
Yeah. and as I recall, we lost most of the H Street corridor in Washington
And Newark. And
Yeah,
Newark.
so
So
we're gonna
understand that.
No, well, we're gonna give it a shot, but I don't think it's gonna be pleasant. I don't think it's gonna be easy. And I think the variable that most American diplomats, and I'm gonna roll them into a big ball, don't understand is it's going to be a really hard sell to the Asian countries that are our quote allies.
I don't think that the Asian countries buy it to begin with. I think that's why you're seeing the Philippines waffle. I think you're going to see the Japanese waffle. It's why you see the French waffling. They don't think we've got the stick-to-itiveness today to do that.
Well, I think you're right, but I think you may underestimate the capacity of the Japanese and the Vietnamese and the Thais to hold their nationalism in a way that is going to rise against the Chinese aggression.
Well, can we hold their coats on this one and say, as my sainted Armenian grandmother used to say, Abris Zakas, have a nice day. Go get them.
I think we're going to try. I think we will try. I think we're going to be that foolish. But I think in the meantime, we have to figure out a way to get them coalesced. And that has to be done in a lot of exotic backroom negotiations that are not necessarily.
That's not the strength of this administration.
Oh, no, and not at all. This is the strength of the Turkish administration or the Russians. The unlawful engagement with these people is what's needed. And our desire and our training, the guys from Princeton and Yale, is to go in and do large contracts in front of television cameras. And that's the part that we've really dropped in the dust because we've abrogated most of them by action. We're not good at keeping promises with these people anymore. And we just don't have the capacity to afford it. So we're going to have to be playing more of the French game, which is really unpalatable for American diplomats because we're taught that that's a bad thing unless you're John Kerry. But we're going to have to be doing some really underhanded stuff to protect ourselves. And we're just not good at it. We fight amongst ourselves very aggressively. So I'm watching, I'm going to see, and I'll vote in 2024 with hope. But we really need to engage these independent Asian countries that have national image and national confidence and are performing quite well. Philippines is doing all right. Japan's doing all right. They're doing better than us, right? When it comes to growth.
Two things. Number one, France waffles on everything. So that's actually not new. And number two is that Thailand has been fighting a Marxist insurgency, a Marxist/Muslim insurgency for a long time that has Chinese support. So they might already have their hands full.
Right. They've been fighting in the South and they've been fighting up in Kachin and dealing with those guys. But everybody in Asia has a Chinese ethnic population. So it's a known thing, right? But in Thailand, in Vietnam, in the Philippines, you have a nationalism. You have an understanding of a national self. Japanese, Koreans. Putting that to work is going to be a very difficult thing for the U.S. to do.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't think we can harness those sled dogs anymore.
Why is our obligation to do that? That's my question.
Because you need an outside arbitrator to harness the sled dogs. The Japanese and the Koreans still literally, I mean, they'll be all smiles for the camera. They cannot stand each other. There's still a lot of heartache from the Japanese occupation of the Korean Peninsula. And the Philippines and the Thai and the Vietnamese, they have a lot of issues over the South China Sea and so. I mean, there's these people, whether these are large issues, small issues, make believe issues, they won't be able. I don't know that they can get over that in time. And the Chinese are very good at exploiting these fissures between different countries to,
Well, let me play a hypothetical role here. I'm the Minister of Defense for pick any one of the nations that you just talked about. Let's say Australia or Thailand or the Philippines or Japan. And I look at the United States today, and we can't even manifest the willpower to fix the sucking chest wound that is the southern border of the United States. That is an existential threat to the United States. It is. As at least as we know it, it is. Okay.
Well,
and fentanyl on it in its own right is that we have no capacity, no interest, no willpower to exert our will on our own border. And so when we come over, we fly in and we provide the template for here's how to deal with China on your own border, Mr. Thailand, Mr. Philippines, Mr. Japan. Don't you think our credibility suffers just a hair? I'm going to leave Afghanistan out of the conversation for tonight, but just on the basis of what is not going on in terms of securing the sovereignty of the United States, don't you think our argument rings a little hollow in their ears?
oh yeah.
Yeah, I do too.
You see, but you have to set the priorities correctly, Steve.
I
Yeah.
am. The priority is the southern border.
No, priority number one from the standpoint of our engagement with our allies now is whether they'll place orders for the F-35. That solves everything, right? I mean, listen to what's going on in the world.
Well, but see, you're making my point for me.
No, I'm concurring.
Because
it's a hard sell.
What I'm saying to you is if in addition to Transgender Day and LGB plus Day and the ability to sort of have drag queen shows in your school libraries, if in addition to that the ticket to being America's ally is you have to buy a plane that doesn't work at several $100 million a copy for us to care about you, then your argument's dead at the outset.
That's the only way we can talk to you. You have to have the right router.
Yeah. So
No,
I don't have a lot of hope in the context of us, riding to the rescue for the third time in a century to everybody who's a Western leaning country, either east or west at this particular point, because I don't think we've got the chops to get it done.
Well,
and I would much rather see the time, money, and effort fixed on securing the border, because we're going to have a fist fight inside that border. It's coming in the next couple of years, and I'd at least like to have it without having a Red Dawn scenario simultaneously.
Right.
It'll be so Korea, Japan, Singapore, Vietnam, none of them can sustain a problem in the South China Sea and the Taiwan area.
Well,
right?
you know what? In Asia, there's a word for that. It's called karma, buddy. That's your karma. Okay? You got out from under the Chinese hegemony for a couple thousand years, but not anymore. Sorry, karma. It's a bitch.
Yeah. Well, the problem is they fill our Walmarts. It'll be an interesting transition. We got to figure out a way to work with them, and I haven't seen any of it.
It's not going to happen. I just you can write it down. This fateful day on so many levels, 19 April 2023, it's not going to happen. I don't think so. Somebody prove me wrong. I'd be happy to be wrong on this, but I think the fat tails are working in my favor here. So, okay, Roger, do we have anybody else?
Well, I've between Joe and I, we've managed to embarrass Don the plebe to jump in. He at first he pleaded, "I'm just a wimpy gun bunny, and I can't hold my liquor," and but he was able to type everything okay. And he said, "Well, I need Stan to give me the hominis dominus," so I took the liberty as the deputy vice alternate for Stan to grant that. And
I was asking where he was in order to be able to do exactly that. So
he said give him a couple of minutes because he needs to figure out his headphones, take a piss, the usual, the usual. I'm a gun bunny. I don't know what I'm doing stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Don's got a card. He carries a card, so that's fine. That's not
Oh
a
yeah,
problem.
yeah.
Hey, Ron, I forgot to invite you, but I'm going to use this opportunity to invite you to something and plug it at the same time. Friday night, we're going to watch a Ukrainian trench combat video on my channel if you want to join us, Ron.
Ron, I've
Sure.
missed you too.
Oh my
Hey,
God!
Don.
Put on a hat. That glare is killing me, dude.
Oh man, no, you gotta get top of the
Wow.
head glare.
Ooh, look at that. I could write War and
you
Peace Chapter 1
shine
on that
that?
blank
You know what?
space.
That's wax on, wax off, isn't it? I mean,
You know what is amazing? Not only is it not waxed, it's not shaved bald. That is not baked.
Okay, you got to explain your T-shirt there. That looks really rocking.
Oh yeah, it's what is it? 22 to 45 escalating caliber. Front side is entry wounds. Rear side's exit wounds.
Oh my
Does a
God!
22? Does a 9mm blow your lungs right out?
Well,
Oh,
so
God.
they took 9mm off the shirt, and it just says dead.
Hmm.
Because since the Biden speech, unfortunately, I bought mine before the Biden speech, so like I have an exit wound that's like this big or something. And
Okay.
so
Well, you have small lungs.
I do. I like. Do you have any idea how much I smoke?
Well, I also know that gun bunnies don't do a lot of running, so they're
Whoa,
not big
now.
on cardiovascular. They're more into weightlifting. Like, I think I can lift this 155 shell. Or
Look, do you understand how far gun 1 is from gun 6? All right. It's super far. All right.
no, I know it's as far away from my radio to your radio. That's all I care about.
Listen, I'm an MP. I know it's about 47 seconds riding in a Humvee.
But only in first gear with no gas. That's how far it is.
well,
All right,
welcome,
see,
Don.
this is
Nice to see you. What's your question, young sir? What can we do for you today?
So there's a lot of and as I'm sure my shit posting in chat has clearly revealed, there's a lot of could we do this, and I don't think that's the right question, because I think we could do this if we wanted to, and I think the reality is that we don't, right?
I think that's right.
Because if we said, okay, Ukraine, this thing is stupid, and despite that we've given you basically everything in excess for the past year and some change now, we're not giving you anything else, right? This is obviously a quagmire and not a thing we can fix. So what we're going to do is we are going to send the aircraft carrier in the Pacific, first of all, and we're just going to park that on the shores of Taiwan, and we're going to park it there until the other 2 aircraft carriers that we have that circle the globe at any given time can get there. And then we're going to start the same World War II pipeline. We're going to build a base. We're going to go take over an airfield in Australia, and we're going to jump up to the Philippines, and then we're coming to you, right? We could do that, but that is a very dedicated, very whole U.S. military endeavor. And it's not we're going to fight a multi-front war on both sides of Asia at the same time kind of discussion. It is a thing we absolutely could do, but we'd have to drop a political war in favor of a real war. And I don't think we're going to do it.
Yeah, I don't think we are.
That's a
either.
good point. That's a good point.
Damn.
Did you notice,
You are
Don, that
wise.
both that there are 2 amphibious ready groups in the East China Sea area right now?
Yeah.
Interesting.
I feel like that's super coincidental, by the way.
Yeah.
Well, how do the Chinese spell target? ARG.
Yeah.
ARG.
And they should, though. I see stuff on a regular basis that's like, well, but people could take out carriers now because whatever piece of technology, and they act like, well, but the hypersonic missile means the carrier is blowing up, and I'm not at all sure that's true. I'm not sure it's not, but I'm not sure that it's true. We are basically, when we send a carrier to go just sit wherever you are, we're saying, here is a relatively small military base that we're just going to drop on your front door. And I don't think people really understand that that's what we're doing, right? We're, here's a battalion. I mean, it's a battalion landing team of United States Marines that has a complement of Navy SEALs, that has a carrier which provides air power, right? Like, don't get me wrong. It's not like we're invading the land when we get there, but we're not just kidding around when we put an aircraft carrier on your coast. Like, it's a real threat, and one that is not just going to go away because you don't like it. But it can only aircraft carrier landing teams are only intended to maintain themselves for something like 72 hours. And then the answer is the rest of the U.S. military comes right behind it. And if we don't agree to that kind of fight, then we can put a carrier there all we want. It kind of doesn't matter.
Yeah.
At what point does the 48% of the Taiwanese population who leans towards reunification with China say, well, we don't want to trade round-eyed domination for Chinese domination in the context of you guys have now invaded us and made us a protectorate of the United States?
Chinese make better for us.
Day one is my guess.
Yeah.
Right. The first round that is fired, they go, "We told you, join with China." Right.
Yeah.
And of that 48%, 10% of that is going to be serious about it, right? I mean, that's just the way that people work.
Yeah,
So,
I don't disagree with that.
Sub 5% of the population is really going to actively say it's time to join China. But 5% of a population the size of Taiwan, where now that means we have to believe that 1 in every 20 people on the island of Taiwan is hostile to us and the government of Taiwan that we want.
Mm-hmm.
That right there, that's an insurgency.
It is.
Right?
That's Fallujah all over again.
Exactly. Right. So we have to fight Fallujah on the island of Taiwan and China. And there's no way we do that and supply Ukraine. It isn't a thing.
So I don't mean to be the downer here, and I don't have any animosity towards Taiwan, but I look at the core competencies that exist in the country today and the trajectory that we're on, and we can continue to do that and bleed our country badly, socially, financially, economically. But I'd much rather us not necessarily get involved in that arena, and that is focus our capacity back on rebuilding the country that we all inhabit at this particular point, and are watching it be basically torn apart by a revolution, a leftist authoritarian revolution that is counter to what was put down in blood and tears 248 years ago today.
So to caveat your point, to build on even, huge quantities of the leftist revolution that we've got going on in this country exists because of Mao's Little Red Book. And that is not a coincidence and not a thing that we should overlook, right? Somewhere around here. I keep it on my desk because it's such an important book.
It's also the right size for a coaster.
It is, which is about half the time.
I've got Shay's book. I don't have Mao.
So Mao's book is just the writings of Mao, and what he did is he distributed non-copyright throughout the United States, which is why you can still buy the thing for something like $10. And that's not coincidental. The Chinese influence in leftist revolutionary thoughts in the United States is not little. They're very powerful and very capable. Communists have always been very good at subversion. If we were to lay siege to Taiwan tomorrow, it would not be unreasonable to assume that Antifa would start lighting basically every major city on fire no later than next Friday.
Promise?
No.
Well,
but it would not be unreasonable to think so.
But they've already had the preliminaries, and that is, Portland is pretty well a wasteland at this point. So
yeah,
we've mastered the technique of how to do that.
Let's not forget too that this guy who blew himself up with fireworks today in Seattle was probably making them into a bomb when he blew himself
Yeah.
up.
Well, maybe he was the guest instructor for the SVAB.
Clearly.
It
Can we
probably worked
get
for the
can we get
FBI.
Watcher? Can I ask you to pull up J-Sups? I'm not pull up his super chat here so we don't ignore him. So because we'll get into this. Agree with me on 2025 unrest unavoidable no matter how the election goes, but our side fares better with unexpected black swan, i.e., dollar collapse, hot war. Well, so that's sort of building on what I've said. It's sort of a different version of the fact that we've just got so many issues to deal with domestically that I think we're going to be constrained from an international perspective, and I don't know how we do that. I don't know how we have a counter revolution in the United States concurrent with, exercising our treaty obligations to NATO and or our war of choice as it relates to Taiwan.
Well, I don't see how China waits till 1 of 25. Their conditions are perfect right now. I mean, everyone else is trying to rush rearm, and they're not armed right now, right? I mean,
well, so
man,
that
there's never been a better
question relies on an estimate that we can't know the answer to, right?
That's true.
If what China is thinking is that they can take Taiwan in 8 months or less, they launch. And that's just a fact. Specifically, if they think they can take them in about 6 months or less. Because if they think they can take them in 6 months or less, they've got a month of time to solidify before we get a new president, regardless who it is. Biden or not, leftist or not, the U.S. will not engage very directly, most likely, with the current administration. Right, like we'll do dumb stuff. How dare you bulldoze Taiwan? We're sanctioning you. Whatever.
China does not care about one bit.
Exactly, right? But if, on the other hand, you've got Trump in office, whether it's a good idea or not, he's very likely to deploy military force. And
to where?
Well, I didn't say it'd be a good idea, right? Like,
well, yeah, but
we've had a couple of discussions.
Where's he going to deploy it to? It's not like we can deploy, our forces to Kuwait to counteract the Iraqi, the Saddam Hussein regime, or to Pakistan to counteract the Taliban.
Well, but we can, right? Because Korea is still very friendly, and we have
Korea is also a large trading partner with the PRC, and they're far enough away from the action that they can be rapidly isolated by the Chinese. So it's, that's like, hey, I got a great idea there, General Gort. Let's deploy the BEF to France to support Poland, September 1939.
Well, and yes, while true, what will happen with that? What will happen with that is
what that does is that brings North Korea. I started to say North Carolina. I'm sorry, North Korea.
North Carolina.
So it puts North Korea directly into the conflict because they won't allow that to happen. The Chinese.
So that will be the problem with North Korea or with South Korea, but we would probably still use South Korea as a buildup space, and we'd use Japan.
If they allow it.
Yes, if they allow it, to be fair. But we'd probably try and use South Korea as a buildup space and Japan as a launch point, right? So we just truck thousands of rounds, millions of rounds of ammo into South Korea.
We're just going to return the rounds of ammo that we borrowed from the Koreans back to them,
and then say, "But they're ours, so we're going to take them anyway." Right?
Well, we've already sold them to the Taiwanese who are holding them in Israel. So,
well, great place for them if you're Taiwan, by the way.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, I think we've sort of come full circle on Taiwan. I think it's a booger of a problem, and I just
want to address the one thing here that J-Sup, but our side fares better with an unexpected black swan event. I don't think so. I don't think that right now, if we had a 9/11 for you youngies, a Pearl Harbor for the old guys like Stan, something, an event like, sorry, I got to bust on somebody here because Don's
That's all right.
looking, he's bleeding already. But some sort of earth-shattering event against America, that Americans together unite against a common foe or for a common cause. I think we're not there anymore.
Yeah, that ship has sailed. Yeah,
I think that there's too much division. I mean, we can't even agree that the Chinese are a threat to the United States. I mean, the Pentagon, those brilliant lights that led the victorious victory march away from Kabul back to Fort Bragg, they say it's a pacing challenge. I have no freaking clue what a pacing challenge is. I mean, unless we're training for the Olympics, but so I'm sorry, Jason. I don't think we do fare better. In fact, I think it will just further exacerbate the fissures in our society, in our political makeup, and we will break apart, not balkanize and all that sort of stuff, but we will break apart to the point where we will be indecisive, and whatever we do decide will be so half-hearted that it will sacrifice the troops and the resources that we send to do whatever we want to do. It'll be Chinese Gordon going to Khartoum and Gladstone going, well, I did all I could.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it very much Vietnam 69 versus the Weathermen in the 70s, but probably worse.
You see, I kind of concur with Ron on this. The difference now is that we don't have the surplus in our economy to allow a comfort of reconstitution, right? So post an event, we're just not able to pull together the depth necessary to recover and continue the actions that we've put underway. We're doing too much. And, society has to have a fundamental base to it. And, over the decades, looking at China versus the US in a crisis, the Chinese have tested the bottoms from a civilizational standpoint more recently than we have. And they believe that we couldn't handle it. They always have. I think the people in Beijing have always had this myth that the Chinese people could do it, but they can only do it in a totalitarian society. They know that they'd get in trouble if they didn't play along. We saw a little bit of this after Tiananmen. There was great hope in '89, and a lot of the young people and the intellectuals got behind it, but it went down real fast because there wasn't the depth of sustainability behind the movement. And the same thing that happened here is I don't know if we have the surplus. We rely too heavily on the corner store, whereas 40, 50 years ago, we didn't. Concur with Ron on this one.
No, totally so.
Well, I think Don touched on something that I want to bring up again, because I think we underestimate the ability for foreign actors to impact the homeland. We fought World War I and World War II and Vietnam. Absent
made us feel invincible. Yeah,
and even in the GWAT, it was 9/11 was horrific, and we responded to that. But there wasn't another 9/11 to speak of thereafter. And I think if you were having mass casualty incidents, fomented by military-age Chinese or Ukraine or Russians or pick your, or cartels on contract, right? That I think that would have a debilitating effect on a whole range of emotions for the United States having a stomach for this conflict. And I think that's why, here's a shout out to Sibley, all of his stuff in Mongol Moon about that sort of, extra military sort of activity from bad actors in the country across the border. I think that's really material in the context of our ability to marshal both economic and political will to do the things that we're talking about doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't, and here's the issue I think that the American people are going to figure out at some point. Let's say we save Ukraine. Okay. And let's say we save Taiwan. How does that change anything in Chicago or Newark or Baltimore?
Well, the important thing here is to remember that with regard to Chicago, that at least the 31st Walmart reparations brigade won't have to deploy. And I think that's an important consideration.
You see,
Come on, Stan, it was funny. You got to at least laugh a little bit.
I see, but I think it's just the opposite. I think they're going to say, well, those Ukrainians got theirs and the Taiwanese got theirs. Where's ours?
Well, I'll just give you a bigger EBT card, dude.
Yeah, can't afford that, Ron. I'm sorry.
no, you see, but that's the issue is we can't afford that, Ron. That's
I know that.
That's the depth of surplus that I think, but nobody wants the American people to really understand that now.
So
Everybody's blowing sunshine up the voters' rear end right now.
I think
And-
there's a
Yeah.
mild caveat to all this, which is to say that if we were fighting China and what we had was a regular supply of Chinese nationals that were blowing things up on U.S. soil, we would say that was enemy action. And that would likely be a uniting point.
Oh,
You
the
could
FBI is going to be on the
reasonably-
case. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah. You could
Great.
reasonably answer me with, yeah, Don, but like tons of people are going to be doing it at the time. And that's probably true. I won't argue with you in the slightest.
So now we're going to have Chinese internment camps this time around.
Exactly, right? But what
Well-
we're going to see on MSNBC, Fox News, and CNN is, hey, China waged war on Taiwan, and then Chinese nationals started blowing things up in the United States.
You're racist. That's xenophobic.
No,
Oh my
it's
God!
not.
How come?
I mean, it's
Why are you
Not
picking
me.
on him?
Not me.
I know.
CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. They're
So
racist.
let me ask the hypothetical rhetorical question that does not require an answer, but does require people to think. So these military aged Chinese folks get together, or operate individually in predetermined units, whatever, and they start launching paramilitary, terrorist, sabotage, whatever attacks against pick a target, whatever. Is this a law enforcement problem or is it a military problem?
I'll forego
Yeah.
answering then.
That's why I threw it out there, because that's an important
Ron,
consideration.
It's an interagency task force. That's what
Yeah.
it is. Come on.
As long as there's donuts and good coffee, I'm all right then.
You've been in the midst of that. Come on.
So
Do you know what
that's
the-
the non-legal observation, Ron.
Do you know what the
that-
short phrase answer to that is? Is we have always been at war with Oceania. That is the answer to your question.
Are you talking about the
Oh.
tuna wars?
Yeah. Well, I have a bias, and it shows. And my bias is that rather than saving Taiwan or Ukraine, I'd like us to sort of sort out and resolve our issues in the United States, or whatever it becomes from that perspective.
I'd like to
I-
save Texas
Well,
and
that's
Arizona.
Me too.
that's-
and New Mexico.
Yeah, that's a good place to start. I think those places have far more claim on our time, attention, and material than does the island of Taiwan, who on the one hand says, yes, we're Chinese and we're part of China, or at least a plurality of the population does, and so I don't know how we're going to, where's Moses when you need him? Go over there, stick the staff in the ground, and split the place in two, and let them migrate to the piece that they want to be in. But I mean, the point is,
there was a really good video image of the American reality gap. Was we were moving our first unmanned surface vessel, drone, whatever you want to call it, into the Persian Gulf this week. And so we have this brand new unmanned vessel cruising through Hormuz, and it's flanked by 2 Coast Guard cutters with giant flags. And I'm sitting here going, all right, so we've created the perfect drone ship, but it needs 2 Coast Guard cutters to go to its area of operation.
but you kind of knew that. I mean, you
it's
kind of
one
knew
of
that
those
was
things
going to be the answer.
you look at and you go, how do you possibly get to that point?
That's easy.
Well, they
That's
tried to
German.
steal the last one we put in that area,
Well, they grabbed it.
right? Didn't they try to throw away the last one?
Well, I think they grabbed one. And we made them give it back, right?
And they shot down a Global Hawk.
Yeah,
And we didn't do a damn thing.
didn't they? Yeah,
We didn't do a damn thing.
that's expensive.
Well,
too. That's
that
260,
regardless-
280.
So, in the world of dollars, that's expensive. But in the world of power, that's way more expensive, right? If you step on my shoes and I have the capability to kill your mother, and you know it, that matters, right? And so, if you step on my shoes and the first thing you do is you fall to the ground and you cry and you beg my mercy, I have the capability to grant you mercy with this power, right? But if you step on my shoes and then spit on my suit, I have to kill your mother. I have to. There's no choice for me as a power broker.
That's
If
the
I
code of the
don't do
West.
it- that's right. If I don't do it, then everybody knows that even if I have this power, I won't use it. So even if I'm capable, I'm impotent, right? And so when Russia shoots down an American item, it is not so much about whether or not they actually shot it down. If Russia fell on their fucking knees and went, look, we understand you're supplying Ukraine, but we really didn't mean to step on your toes. We're fighting Ukraine. We don't like that you're resupplying them, and we're super duper sorry. And Putin came out and gave a big speech, and the whole military came out and saluted an American flag and said, nope, that's not what we meant to do. You could, in the world of power brokering, at least give some leeway. But when they just shoot down American military items, if you just go, well, I don't know, then what everybody sees is, even if that guy had that power yesterday, he's not exercising it. He won't exercise it. And that sounds like some neocon bullshit. But this is just a simple reality of how powerful things interact with each other.
Yeah, real
right?
politic.
Yes.
And the other thing is if you have that power or that perception of that power, and you don't do anything, several times,
Mm-hmm.
hey, maybe my perception of this so-called power that you possess is not true, is incorrect, and therefore you're a paper tiger.
Yes.
Yeah, the myth dies.
And look, you can, if it's you personally, right? If it's a mob boss, the mob boss can retire, right? And say, hey, maybe I'm not the guy that kills your mom anymore. But just so you know, if you come pester me too much, I'll call a guy, he'll call a guy, and your mother's going to die. But what he can't do is just stand out on the street and, have people take advantage of his anus on a regular basis. That's not a thing he can do.
God, see, once again, the artillery in you comes out.
Yes.
Jesus. First thing you guys learn at Fort Sill is this is your prison pocket.
I
Got it.
It's like you've been to Fort Sill.
just as a tourist.
All right. Shall we continue, or do you guys want to wrap it up for the evening? What's your pleasure?
No, go.
Okay. All right. Well, we need a topic. I'm going to look to the chat for a topic.
Hold on. I want to ask the chat a question first.
Yeah, go ahead.
Uh-oh.
Chat. One in the chat. If you would buy Tactical Wisdom branded
Oh,
T-shirts,
Jesus.
so
Well, yeah.
I'd rather buy
Watcher is
Don's
also very
t-shirt.
curious about the answer to this.
yeah, I'm sure Watcher is.
Don, you need to send me where you got that T-shirt. That's a cool T-shirt, not some corporate logo, Nike swoosh, Maltese cross fox, whatever thingy-majigger you're wearing there.
Wow.
Sorry, I'm going to bust on you, Joe.
Real quick, I do have one
I know
guest
you
that
don't.
decided they want to hop in.
Bring him in.
Oh, God.
It'll be a minute, but it's Rick, Duke of Malta.
Oh, we will
Oh.
definitely.
Oh.
Rick in.
Hang on, let me go get to the ammo locker. I got to get some extra.
Need
Link.
something with a little more pepper on it, right?
And can you bust Kevin Doerr's bubble about elections for me?
What's he saying?
Aw.
That I'm ruling out Trump winning an election, and how can I rule out DeSantis winning? Simple.
Jesus.
Oh, Jesus.
Well, there you go. You wanted a topic, now we got one.
No,
But Trump is our savior.
I don't think so.
Trump. It's the second coming.
Fucking Allahu Trump.
You know, hey, chat and audience. I got it. Donald Trump represents some of the common man stuff. He's good at the personal. The way he conducts the rallies and the way he interacts with some people, but he sucks at the personnel part.
But
I mean,
that's not even my point. My point is it could be the perfect Republican candidate for us all, and it's not going to matter because they're not going to just suddenly stop cheating. It doesn't matter who the candidate is; they're not going to let them win.
Yeah, I think that's the lesson of the Fox settlement with Dominion voting. Is that Dominion voting?
Right.
Dominion voting goes into this with $800 million of Rupert Murdoch's money to fortify whatever they want to fortify. And if you thought community organizers made a ton of money in 2020 and again in 2022 in certain states,
shit, I'm about to become a Democratic community organizer.
You ain't seen nothing yet. And I don't know. I don't want to sound blasphemous, but I think Jesus Christ could come down and become a Republican, and I'm not sure he could win the vote in the context of 2024 with what's likely to happen.
I guess I'm just gonna have to vote harder.
Can I start?
The problem
with...
it's not the candidates, it's process. Not going
it's
to
process,
right?
As long as you've got early and mail-in voting, the opportunity for fraud is almost limitless, and we saw it in 2020. We saw it in Maricopa County in 2022. We're going to see it again in 2024.
Well, so let's hold on a minute and let's pretend that Trump wins. What happens next? What is the thing that we're all hanging our hat on? What is this massive hope? Why are we going, when Trump wins, everything will be better? What is the better? What happens?
Well, I get appointed Secretary of Defense.
Oh, shit, that's better already. I'm sold.
I'm going to walk into the Pentagon, and it's going to be a ghost town by the time I walk out at the end of the first business day, because there's going to be a line of people getting fired left and right.
I'll tell you what.
Every general officer, every flag officer.
In true service to the country fashion, I will happily, for the first time in many years, drive over to DC and I will work for you entirely for free. And all I want to do is fire officers 04 and below.
Yes.
Well, any 04 and below that's working in the Pentagon deserves to be fired because they should be out with the troops. They're not going to do squat at the Pentagon except, would you like cream in your coffee, sir?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think the issue you've got is that you got to frame that scenario with more detail. So let's say Trump wins, you keep the House, but you don't have the Senate, which is a likely outcome.
That's not good.
So what does Trump do then? Right?
Well, hold on.
Or even DeSantis. What does DeSantis do then?
Let's be as beneficial as possible. You take the House, you take the Senate, and Trump wins the presidency. Then what? Right? Because I don't want to caveat this because people are very willing to give excuses if there's any chink in the capability to hypothetically do whatever you want, right? So let's go even further. Not only do we take the House and the Senate, we take them at super majorities. 70 seats in the Senate, 350 seats in the House, right? Unrealistic numbers, things that will never, ever, ever, ever happen. Yet, let's presume this happens. Then, what do we think would happen that makes this so worth it that we absolutely need to get in it?
We're going to build a wall and Mexico's going to pay for it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Salud, Rick. Salud.
Hey, Rick.
Welcome, Rick.
Cheers from the South, brothers.
Indeed.
I don't know if I can handle this. That's an engineer.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God.
Your castle.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
It worries me.
And
Oh,
no one
this
knows
has
about
been
this shit.
modified. This is a medical hat cord. My engineer hat cord, the red and white one, is hanging up.
Well, I'm just looking at the gold target, which gives me a great aiming point.
Yes, it does. Well, if
I'm
you
just
were here, if you were here last
Hey,
week, you
hey,
would see
Rick,
it
yeah,
now.
I was here last week, and I'd like to ask you about the flag shrinkage issue that you seem to be
No.
having.
Yeah, your flag looks
Did you
much
wash
smaller.
it?
Hey, look, Rick's
Hold the
flags were in the
phone.
pool. It
Do
was
you need to
cold.
borrow one of Joe's blue pills for your flag?
Okay,
Dude,
all right.
I
Now
gave
you're
you that. I told you that in confidence, Ron.
Well, sorry, I've had a bourbon or two now, so.
I got the blue
Would you
pill
prefer
from
that?
you, but yeah, we did. That's nice, man.
Yeah.
all righty.
All right, what you got, Rick?
All right. Your
I
credibility has been
actually,
restored.
thought for today, April 19th, that my flag up there is the Gadsden flag.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, I'm echoing. Great. So, anyway, my Confederate flag, my Confederate battle flag has shrunk. And there's also the Gonzales, the Gonzales flag is up there.
Okay.
So, you
So,
had a question.
Yeah. Have you got a comment or a question that we can?
yes,
speak
I
to?
do.
Okay. Let's do that.
You have been talking all day today, Stan. You've been talking all day today that 2025 Eastern week, the shit's going to hit the fan.
I believe that. Yeah.
I concur. And I believe, and this is what I wanted to discuss, is that why are we worried so much about the Taiwanese and the Ukrainians when we need our own southern border, our Canadian border now, and also these out of control cities?
How many hours you got? I mean, there's answers to those questions.
There are answers to those
But
questions.
the short answer is how many hours you got.
Yeah.
Well, I think, yeah. You ask the rationalist question, okay, and so there's two things that I'm working on that I see a couple of questions in the chat about. One is where's the map, okay, the national divorce map, and I am working on that with some level of detail, working on a county by county map. So I'm trying to get granular about this so that when it is discussed, it can be discussed in a coherent fashion with some facts behind it. And then the other thing I'm working on is the outline of a book called Rules for Rationals, okay, which is sort of the antidote to Rules for Radicals, which has been the playbook along with Chairman Mao's Little Red Book for 35, 40 years, okay? And so it's going to take time for us to sort of get that done in a way that makes some sense. But the point is that you ask sort of the question that a rationalist would ask, and that is, hey, wait a minute, this whole fucking joint's on fire, and we're shipping water overseas that we could be using to put out the fire here in the United States. Okay, and I think I've moved on to the fact that the action that has to be taken, maybe not militarily, hopefully not militarily, but from a political and to some degree economic perspective, is that those of us who are rationals have got to execute a counter-revolution against the leftists and the authoritarians who are carrying the day as we speak. Okay, and that's going to take some time as well. And that is, in my mind, that is the effort that's worth efforting with the resources that we have left in the country to be able to sort of to combat that issue, as opposed to whether or not Volodymyr Zelensky is going to be emperor for life in Ukraine, which I don't care about, to be honest with you.
Stan, DM me when the show's over.
Huh?
DM me when the show is over.
Okay. And so it's a, you know, it's the rules for rationals, I think is a great way to sort of go about that. But the problem is, where do we start?
Right.
And is your question, where do we start? Because and I think it's a process. I think we've talked about the sort of inertia of the rationals in this society. We talked about that earlier today on CFC, and I think that we have to go through. Oh, I started to say, I will say it. Okay, I told you guys that we always watch the Passion of the Christ on Easter weekend. Well, I watched that, and I think we have to go through the passion of the rationals in this country. It's got to get so fucking bad that people who are akin to sit at home and not do much about it other than bitch about it are moved to action with respect to the pathway that the country is on. And I think the next 2 years is going to be the passion of the rationals. I really do.
Can I
Yeah.
half-assedly explain why you should DM me at the end of the
Yeah.
show?
Yeah.
Could you reasonably say that these people are going to need something personalized to them, something that is an emotional strike that is going to get them up off of simply rationalizing and calling out things like hypocrisy or
Correct.
whether or not these are
I went to a
rational
school board
ideas?
meeting, Don. I'm done. I did my part, right?
You could say, as it were, that they needed an emotional push to get involved.
I think that's right.
You mean like if they canceled The View? I mean, my God.
Well, we don't want those people, so don't cancel The View. Keep that
Okay.
thing going.
I just saw that Roseanne is getting her own show on the same time slot as The View on Fox.
We'll see.
Fox is dead. You know that, don't you? I mean, Fox and
Not that
Fox
I think that money is like I think it's funny money.
I think Fox has been dead since they called Arizona like, oh, the polls just
I
closed in
agree,
Arizona.
Yeah, that's
so
exactly that's
yeah,
exactly.
I mean,
Chris Steyerwalt was an agent provocateur. He went in, did his job. They fired him. If they bring him back, which I've speculated on Twitter yesterday, if they bring him back, then you'll know what the fix was.
Yeah.
But the point is that Fox is dead. You can see it in the Wall Street Journal editorial page. You can see it in the New York Post. All the Murdoch products have been co-opted, and it's only going to get worse from here.
Yep.
Because the Suns play a greater and greater role in the context of what goes on there. And Lackland's wife is a card-carrying Hillaryist. So I don't know what to tell you.
But don't you think that just their eyes on though? I mean, I'm saying about what I'm telling you is Fox eyes on.
Keep going. I got to go. I got to go rescue Tacticat. He's trying to get in the house. So you guys.
So with Fox,
I think I have a dispensation.
Money will roll in. Okay.
Well, I think Fox is it's just dead, and it just doesn't realize it. It's a lot of people still watch Fox and listen to what they say and try to repeat it and think it's the truth. But because they're not aware of any other news media that that communicates to them, like a Newsmax or One America or and I'm just naming these off. Not that I listen to any of them. I have my own sources and things like that. But Fox is in the business to ads and and gather audience share, and whatever they have to do. I mean, they have very few decent personalities left in their stable of media personality.
There's two I watch. Tucker and Gutfeld.
Have we all seen the video clip of the guy from, I don't know, I want to say it's the 40s, might be before that, but he's sitting in a library and he says, I don't want to make a communist or progressive film that nobody watches. I want to make a film with one drop of progressive propaganda in it everyone watches. Do we all know what I'm talking about?
No.
Take that as a no. All right. So there was a guy back in the 30s or 40s that recorded a set of basically rules for the communists in America and how to deal with the problems of getting America to swallow communist ideas, because America had notoriously been resistant to it. And one of the things that they discuss is the idea that if you create a cultural icon or event, that cultural icon or event must be consumable by the masses. It's not that you need a film that is inherently communist. It is that you need a film that has some communist propaganda in it that everyone watches. And what you're all watching right now, what you're all seeing when you look at Fox News and you go, but they've fallen, is you are watching that one drop and then watching it grow. Right? You can add an additional drop after everyone accepts the first drop. You can add a second drop after everyone accepts the first two, right? And that is what you're seeing happen with Fox News, is that Fox may or may not have been the based on red pill thing that was doing all the stuff back in the 90s, but it was better than everybody else. And what you're watching is that little eyedropper just drip, 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 drip. And it moves further left as they do this. And the thing is, they have a viewer base, and that viewer base accepts just a little more communist propaganda, just a little more, to the point that if you watch Fox News today, and you haven't done it in a very long period of time, as I haven't, I occasionally watch Fox, is not Tucker Carlson, right? Like once a year, I go pull some show and watch it. And what I see is, this is 1980s communist propaganda that you're watching. And that's just true, right there. Fox News is 30, 40 years behind whatever the current communist propaganda is. It's no longer we love America. It's no longer what all of us think. I read the Constitution, Thomas Paine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. None of that matters. It is what is acceptable to push just a hair further left, just a little bit more, right? And they, whether you, I, or anybody else like it or not, have millions and millions of viewers. And as great as Tucker may or may not be in any given moment, he carries that communist propaganda with him. And that's how this works.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. And I, you know, I'm about to drop my. I take a physical paper from the Wall Street Journal because I prefer to read it that way. And I can't read the editorial page anymore. It's just mind numbing. It's ridiculous. It's gone so far to one way or the other, and the excuse making and it vacillates between neocon nonsense and goofy apologists. And then my favorite is what's her name, Peggy Noonan, who's nursing home granny, waxing about stuff that happened 40 years ago. So it's just, I can't do it any longer.
And speaking of can't do it any longer, we're getting ready to pull the plug here, Stanley.
Gents, we are fast approaching Scott levels of
incoherence.
So no, I wouldn't say it's incoherent, but we are running along. I was
joking.
And I asked the question 20 minutes ago, and everybody said, let's continue to go forward. So we're here. So
well, we did, and we're done. We've culminated.
Yeah. I don't disagree.
Everybody stop talking. Everybody stop talking. Everybody stop talking. I think that Joe Jostradamus has a very good feel for what goes on the ground.
And
because of that knowledge, there are certain things that can be that there. No, there's just certain things that can be done to counter the things that would be detrimental to us.
That's true. That's where we're coming up with the rules for radical or for rationals.
Right, right. Now, when that book gets written, I would be very interested in reading it. But the map, the map segment that you're working on, Stan, I am extremely interested in, specifically when you said county by county is what I've been finding. Eastern Washington, Eastern Oregon.
Yeah, and that's where the rub is trying
And
to.
Florida, in Florida, we are 4 cities.
Yes.
The whole is I want to call it the Acela that goes from BC through Baltimore to New York.
Yeah.
Yep, the train. Yeah,
I used to go on the Eastern Shuttle. That's how old I am. I used to go. I used to get on the Eastern Shuttle. Used to get on the plane and give the stewardess my money, and she'd sit me down.
Okay. All right. Well, let's do this.
Well, I'm having audio problems, which has been challenging. So.
All right, everyone. We appreciate your time tonight. This has been excellent, and I think this is where we wrap. We'll see you next week.